But I did start to make a list of people I've met that I've talked with, okay? Under athletes, singers, actors, artists, writers, politicians, etc. So I stopped at 90, but I know it's well over 100. I was going to put in famous mob people, but I thought better than that.
Oh, I was looking forward to that part. Stop 1 second. Make sure. I'll speak first. Today we're recording Mortimer Berkowitz in his office in New York. Today is May the 28th, 2025, and this is the life story of Mortimer, Mort as we know him.
And his full name is Morton. Not
Morton.
Mortimer.
Okay,
Yes.
well, we'll have to get that straight in the record.
Okay.
So, Mort, full name, birth date, where you were born.
I was born in New York on July 29th, 1939. I was named Morton Stanley Berkowitz, and it turned out that my parents had read about a millionaire named Morton Stanley, so that's how I got the name.
Morton Stanley.
Yep, that's it. My father came from Russia, White Russia as it was called, when he was 1 year old. And he came over here with his mother, his father, and 3 sisters. And
What year was that, Mort?
1902. You see, it's all very sketchy because all the documents were written in Russian, and in those days, it was done by a Jewish calendar. So if it was X, that's what the date was. And so they were never really that sure. My father was never really that sure about any of that. But it was interesting. So they came here, and my father was an athlete. He was a boxer. He was a tough guy. He fought in the Golden Gloves. Many years later, as a devout Union man, when management sent in scabs, the Union sent in my father and some of his friends. And so much for that.
Why did they come to America? Why were they leaving Russia?
Who knows?
You don't know.
Who knows? Certainly to seek a better life. I mean, life for Jews in Russia was not good. There was no advancement, there was no nothing. What we did find out many years later through my cousin Barbara, that she sent away and was able to get some documents that showed that they were a middle-class family in Russia. And they were not poor, but they came over here and to establish a new life. Now, my mother was born here. My mother's father was a scholar. He was, as my mother said, he was 6'7", but pictures of him shows the reverse, that he was not 6'7", that maybe he was 5'8", 5'9". The interesting thing is that when my mother was born, she had 2 sisters, Aunt Gertrude, who was at that point 17, and Aunt Anna, who was 19, and my mother, who was just born. So her parents died fairly thereafter, and my mother was raised by relatives.
Where was her family from? More Russia also?
No, I think they came from Austria. Now, my grandfather, was, I think, born in Germany, and he walked according to my mother, to England, where a family sent them, paid to send them over here. All those things are sketchy because she really didn't know that much.
What was her name, Mort?
Dorothy Platzman, Platzman.
Platzman.
Man.
And your father's name?
So my father, I found an autograph book when he graduated public school, and it was divided. There were people that called him Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R, Morris, and Mo. He called himself Mo Berkowitz, M-O-E, but I just thought it was so weird that equally 1/3 of his friends knew him as Meyer, and 1/3 knew him as Morris. Who knows?
What did you call him, other than father?
I called him Dad, because
Dad.
if I ever called him by his name, I'd get walloped.
Did you get walloped much as a kid?
My father was pretty strict. He worked all day, but there was no nonsense at home.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have one brother, Gene, who is 7 years younger than me. And so understand that I grew up, for the first 7 years, I had my own room. And then suddenly there was this crying baby in there, which I hated, absolutely hated. But as it turns out now, we are as close as could be. And he lives near me. And
So what part of New York did you grow up in?
Brooklyn. Always grew up in Brooklyn. Always lived in Brooklyn.
What was your address there?
125 East 18th Street. That's when I was old enough to know an address. I'm sure we lived in other places in Brooklyn before. So my parents had never been to Brooklyn. My mother grew up in Manhattan, and she grew up watching the George Washington Bridge being built. And she and a friend would sit there and count the cars on Broadway, because there were very few cars in those days. My mother was born in 1907, and she died at 96. My father died of a heart attack at 76. We were a Jewish family, although one year, apparently, we did have a Christmas tree, which was my mother's doing, not my father's. My father was a clothing cutter, men's clothing. So he got dressed every morning. He woke up at 6 o'clock. He put on his suit, his hat, which was just so. He looked like George Raft, and he was immaculately dressed. And he would take the train to 14th Street. In those days, men's clothing was cut around Union Square. Women's clothing, which was the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, was in the 30s.
Huh.
And that's when the textile union, they were all in New York City. Everything was done in New York City.
When was the Great Fire at the Garment Workers?
I think around 13, but I'm not sure.
And he worked there his whole life?
He worked there his whole life.
At the same place?
No.
But in that area?
In that area. He would the company would go out of business, he would get laid off, whatever, but always within a week or two, he was working again. And it was a very hard life, because you got to work, the first thing you did, you took your suit off, you put on a gown, and you stood all day by a machine cutting clothes, cutting the fabric. And periodically, he would lose a finger or half of a finger because someone said something to him. He would turn around and it just took part of a finger off. And I remember seeing stumps for a period of time. Every morning, he would go to a coffee shop and to meet friends on the corner of 17th Street and Union Square East. And it's still there. And it's the area has obviously totally changed. There's no men's anything there anymore. But that's what he did every single day.
How about your mother? Did she work?
My mother stayed home. Now my father earned probably maximum, he might have earned 100 and a quarter a week. That was okay through the 40s and 50s. But when we got to the late 50s, my mother went to work. And my mother got a job. My mother was an extraordinary individual, similar to yours. She was a community organizer in Brooklyn. She organized tenants with a guy named Marty Berkowitz, who was a 16-year-old kid looking to get involved in politics. And Marty, they organized the Flatbush Tenants Council, and my mother was there from the beginning. And Marty went on to become borough president. He was a New York State senator, and a friend of the family, obviously. And when I had moved to Manhattan, and I had my own place, I called home one day, and Marty answered the phone because he had moved in. And I said, put my mother on. And he said, say please. And I responded in a way that caused him to hang up. And I called back and I said, please put my mother on. He said, Daddy, your other son is on the phone. Now my father was a devout union man. He believed that Sidney Hillman, who was the head of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America and a close friend of President Roosevelt, could do no wrong. Whatever Sidney said, that was it. And one day, to give you an idea of my father's commitment, one day my father came home and we had dinner, and my father said, where did you get the quart of milk? I said, I went to the A&P. And he said, was anything different about the A&P? I said, there were people walking around with signs outside, but I didn't know. And I learned that night.
Scab.
Right. Never, never, never cross a picket line.
Yeah.
And that was that. I kept that forever.
Was that all that industry unionized when your father worked in it?
Always. All union. And mostly Jewish. Now, my father, when he first started working, his first job was stuffing olives. You know, the pimento and the olive. So you walked around in boots because it was all sloshing on the floor, and that's what he would do. But he worked straight through the Depression. And he was a good-looking guy. He had a number of female friends, and I know very little about them, obviously, but I've seen enough pictures to know. And when they took pictures in those days, they took them on rooftops. So it's very rare that I saw a picture of one of my father and his friends that was not on a roof. In hot days, you slept on the roof, or you slept on the fire escape, because there was no air conditioning. Certainly no air conditioning. And different. different.
Is the place you grew up, 125 East 18th Street, still
It's still there.
still housing there?
It's still there. And a very interesting thing about it is that across the street from it, excuse me, was the Knickerbocker Field Club. No Jews allowed. Now, in the 60s, they took the sign down because they needed anybody to join. Now, there were railroad tracks on 17th Street, and we lived on 18th. 17th Street was the other side of the tracks, and there were big mansions there where the rich people lived. And you would cross the bridge to get to the other side, but just to look around and then go back to where you lived.
Did you feel there was prejudice when you were a kid? Did you feel singled out as a Jewish person?
Well, everybody in the neighborhood was Jewish. Now, the two times I felt different, I sold lemonade when I was 12. And I was told you have to be out by 3 o'clock off the street, because Holy Innocents was a church down in Cortelia Road in East 18th, and the kids got out of school. And the one time I stayed late selling lemonade, they flipped over my lemonade stand.
The non-Jewish kids.
Right. So I knew that was not a good thing to do, to leave. You had to leave on time. And then on Church Avenue, which was 2 blocks away from where I lived, there was mostly, or a large number of German families there. And you really didn't mix with people. You stayed with your own. Your friends were Jewish until I got to school. In public school, PS 139, I found a black student named Clee Snipe. Really a nice guy. And many years later, when I was working in the garment area for Judy Bond blouses, I was in charge of monogramming. It was a summer job. I ran into Clee on the street, and he told me he had gone to a Chinese restaurant that would not serve him. And so he asked for the manager, and he said, "Must my ambassador call the owner of the restaurant?" "No, Mr. Snipe, we didn't know, because he was an African diplomat. So they thought, so they were happy to serve him. Just one more little incident from the neighborhood. Now, going back to my mother, my mother's mother had 7 brothers and sisters located all around the country. We never knew most of them. I knew my Aunt Ray and her family, but I never knew. We had Dora Bell Klutz, who lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but that's all I knew about Dora Bell. And I knew the other names, but there was such a big difference in age. I mean, my mother was a love child or an accident, and by the time she knew anything, they were all gone.
How about cousins?
So Aunt Ray had a daughter, Lily, a son, Al, a son, Harold, and a son, Marty, and they were my cousins. And Harold had Alan. Alan was terrific. He had Kenny. Kenny got married to Doris, and Doris and Kenny have 2 children, Robin, who you know, and a brother, Scott, who you may or may not know, and we're very close. Continue to be close with Robin. She is my closest
Relative.
of all my relatives. Yes.
I can see why. Yeah.
So now my brother
Gene?
was not, my brother Gene was not a good student. He graduated high school with a general diploma and came home, and the next morning at 7:30 my mother woke him and said, "Get a job." And so he was out of the house.
At what age was that more?
18, 17, 18. He learned to drive at 16. My father taught him how to drive. I never had any desire to drive. Interesting, but... So my brother got a job with a bra company. He's a great salesman. And he left that to get a job selling clothes. And he worked for a company, and he left the company one day, and he's looking for a job. And interesting that someone said that a man named David, who owned a company called Rear Ends, was looking for a salesman. So my brother went up. It was during Buyers Week. So Buyers Week, their office was at 40th Street and 7th Avenue, which was, there were 2 big buildings there that all of the sportswear companies were there. Now the doors, they were all glass. So it worked out that my brother was being interviewed and he faced the door. And his later boss, David, had his back to the door. 2 women came by and came in. They were buyers for Sears Roebuck. And my brother had known them. They were all very friendly. And they said, "Are you working here now? Because we still have $500,000 to spend." And David quickly said, "Yes, he starts now." Or maybe it was the next day, but whatever it was, they came back and deposited. They bought. And that turned out that 7 years later or so, David, when he hit 30, because his father had given him this company, and he sold 1/3 of it to a guy named Dick who owned G&G shops in Brooklyn, which was very successful. And David decided at 30, this was not what he wanted to do. So they decided Dick would buy him out. But my brother, let's say that the company needed $7 million to break even. Anything above that was pure profit. And my brother was selling maybe $5 million a year. So the answer was they had to give my brother something. And so they gave him 1/3 of the business because it made sense. And my brother did that until he was 49, and then he retired.
At 49?
At 49, he retired.
Did he sell up his part of the business, or does he still have it?
He gave it to Dick.
Okay.
He had made his money. He just wanted out of the company. And eventually the company went under. But he was fine.
Yeah.
He was fine. So my mother, as I mentioned, she had a great attachment to her father. And one day when she was 12 and my Aunt Gert was 30, they were in Coney Island, Brighton Beach. And my mother felt a pang. And she said to Aunt Gert, something just happened to Dad. We have to go home. And Gertrude continued to do what she was doing with friends. My mother went home. He had died. Now, the Corsican twins by Dumas is about two twins who felt for each other. They knew what was happening to each other, whether that's true or not. Now, my grandfather raised parakeets.
This is your mother's father.
Yep. And within an hour of his death, they all died. All 7 of his birds died. Now, understand that this may be apocryphal, but this is from my mother, so that's to the best of her knowledge. Now, she was shifted to Aunt Beatty, who was a very lovely woman. She had 2 sons, Myron and Arthur. Both served in World War II. Arthur became famous later on as Arthur of New York. He was a hairdresser, and he was on the David Letterman show one day. And Letterman used a squirt bottle, and they were each working on a woman's hair. And Letterman was really lousing it up, which Arthur had to repair it. But he squirted Arthur, and Arthur started squirting him. And it's live on TV. You can't make that stuff up. So my mother lived on a couch in Aunt Beatty's apartment, and for many years until she died. And then she shifted to Lily and Al. That was Aunt Ray's daughter, or son, Al. And she lived with them. And that's probably why we're closest to that side of the family. That's Robin's father and his mishpacha, his uncles. Now, Al had a clothing company and was very successful, at least on paper. And Kenny, who was his eldest son, his only son, met a young lady, and they got married. And it was to a family where her uncle owned the Virginian, the Texan, the Floridian, which were major restaurants in Times Square, and major restaurants. And I remember at their wedding in Muncie Park, in Spring Valley, they took over a hotel, and the lobby was cleared out of all furniture, and it was a giant smorgasbord. Hold on one sec.
Back to your mother, Mort. Where did she get her desire to organize the community?
I have absolutely no idea, but she became friends with Marty, and many years later, for Mom's 80th, we had a party at Windows on the World, and it was terrific, except that it was totally fogged in. You could not see 1 inch. And Marty came and spoke, about Mom. And he said, I don't know what's going on here, but I do know that as I look out, if I could see anything, I would see Brooklyn. And blah, 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 blah. They were very close. And when my father died, Marty got her an apartment in Manhattan with the rent frozen.
Mm-hmm.
So, she paid the same $300 till she passed.
Yeah.
And the city paid the rest.
Were you close to your mother?
Yes.
Closer than you were with your father?
Oh, yes. Yes, yes. My father and I had the same temperament. My brother was very easy to get along with. I was not. And I always had to get the last word in. And my father always had to get the last word in. I'll give you an interesting story. On Sunday, we would have bagels and lox. And I would go to the Savoy around the corner and buy the stuff and bring it home. And all the bagels would be in a dish. And as people were grabbing, my father took his hand and touched it all, which meant keep away, my father's choice, whatever Dad wants, and that was it. Yeah. So it was an interesting life. I mean, we never thought we were poor. We were middle class like everyone else in the neighborhood.
Was it a safe neighborhood?
Yes.
That's good.
So from the time I was 10, maybe earlier, I would be on the street playing ball. I would be around the corner playing ball. You played stick ball, you played stoop ball, and you could be out all day.
What is stoop ball?
You know what a stoop is?
The steps?
The steps.
Yeah.
You had a Spalding, and you hit it against, and you caught it. I mean, there were guys catching it in the street.
Behind you.
Yeah.
So you
Now,
angled it.
if you were able to hit it in such a way off the point, it would really sail, and it would go across the street beyond anybody's reach. We did that for years.
And your stick ball?
We played stickball on 19th Street around the corner with cars periodically coming, so you would have to stop. It was a broom handle, and somebody would pitch, and you would hit. I was not an athlete. I was always the last to be chosen. We also had the parade grounds, which are still there. Parade grounds, a huge expanse of land of Caton Avenue, and many professional athletes, baseball players, got their start there. I mean, it was really terrific. And we were there all day. Your parents weren't worried about you. You were just there.
Now the polo grounds, were they?
No, Ebbets Field. We were Brooklyn Dodger fans.
Oh, okay.
We were Brooklyn Dodger fans until O'Malley took them out of Brooklyn. And now the Ebbets Field is now a housing project. But the interesting thing is, I could walk there on my own. And my parents let me go to a doubleheader against the Pittsburgh Pirates. On a Sunday, the game ended, the second game ended, and my parents are waiting for me to come home, but I didn't come home. I wanted an autograph. There was a guy, we always followed people, the baseball players. He was a guy carrying bats, and I followed him into Crown Heights, and it turns out he was a bat boy. And by that time, it was dark out. I had no idea where I was, and I found a policeman, and he put me on a train. Now, unknown to me at the time, my parents were scared stiff. My father went down to Ebbets Field and met with Charlie Dressen, who was the Brooklyn Dodger manager. And along with several policemen, they scoured Ebbets Field looking for their son, looking for me. I was still following this guy into who knows where. Needless to say, I was not allowed to go out for Ebbets Field for a while.
So after the Dodgers, who'd you pull for? Did you ever pull for the Yankees? I'm sorry.
You were obviously not from New York. I rooted for the LA Dodgers because everyone I knew was on that team. Now, another thing that's interesting, you see all the big contracts that baseball players get today. I mean, multi-millions of dollars. In those days, nobody made money. And the baseball players, the Dodgers, in the off-season, lived in the neighborhood. So Duke Snyder lived 2 blocks away. And you would see the Duke walking. You would see these guys in restaurants. You would see them having odd jobs because they didn't earn that much money. Now, a very well-known story, Ralph Kiner, who was the home run champion, Pittsburgh Pirates, Branch Rickey, when he was bought out of Brooklyn, became part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And Kiner went to him for a raise. He was earning $50,000, and he said he wanted a raise to $100,000. And Rickey said, "How many home runs did you hit this year?" And he said 54 or 55, whatever it was. "How many runs did you knock in?" He said about 160, 170, whatever. He said, "And what place did we wind up in?" "Last." "And without you, we'll still be last. Get out of here."
Someone once asked Babe Ruth if he made $100,000, and they said, "Did you realize you make more money than President of the United States?" And he said, "Well, I've had a better year."
Now, coincidentally, Babe Ruth lived around the corner from me. He lived at 110 Riverside Drive, which is on the corner of Riverside and 83rd Street. His alleged mistress lived on 85th Street and Riverside Drive.
You live on 81st? Where do you live?
84th.
84th. You know, Valerie's sister lives on 80th.
But that's another story because I really became me when I moved to 84th Street.
So you went to public school?
I went to PS 139. I went to Wall Whitman Junior High School and Erasmus Hall High School. Now, Erasmus Hall, which was located on Flatbush Avenue, off Church Avenue, had 9,000 students.
High school?
High school. The first year, you did not go there. You went there for 3 years. My graduating class, my brother's graduating class, had over 2,500 kids graduating.
72 in mine. How many in yours?
We were very small. We only had 1,000. I am still friendly with a number of people. I'm friendly with some people from public school who I've known now for over 80 years, which is just beyond me to think about that. 80 years to know someone. A kid who grew up, Jerry Katz, who grew up around the corner from me, and we're still friends.
Wow. Were you a good student?
Absolutely not. I was a horrible student. I was naturally semi-bright, so I never thought that homework applied to me. And as a matter of fact, when I graduated high school, I applied to Brooklyn College, and in those days, you needed a 164 combined score between your high school average and the test that they gave. I came up with 163.9. I got a letter from the Board of Education telling me, sorry, but I did not make Brooklyn College. And there was an asterisk, which I never bothered to read. I called my mother to say that I didn't make it, and they could not afford to send me to school, to college. And I had no idea. It was a horrible day. My mother got home and looked at the letter, saw the asterisk, turned it around, and said, you did make Hunter College, which required a 163 average. Brooklyn and CCNY required 164. Queens College and Hunter was 163.
Damn.
And it turned out to be great for me because I never would have blossomed at Brooklyn College because all the people I knew from high school, so many of them went there. All the leaders of the high school, of the class, et cetera, et cetera. I was a nobody in high school. And when I got to college, I became someone. And on my first day at college, I met a guy named Larry Finkelstein, and we are still best friends today. We took a political science course together, and you had to write a term paper, and you had to get it typed. I didn't know how to type. So I wrote it out by hand, and Dr. Hirschfield, who I loved, looked at this and said, Berkowitz, it said type. I said, but I don't type. He said, the first thing you do when you get to college, you find a girlfriend, she types, and that's it. And Finkelstein yelled out, he has enough trouble getting a girlfriend, much less one who can type. And that's a story. It was good. It was good. I got involved in politics.
Why was that? Why was that? Were y'all Democrats? I guess all Jewish people.
Of course.
Right? Yeah.
Of course. Now, going back to my parents, when FDR died, my father worshipped FDR. Nobody knew at the time he was anti-Semitic or that he had refused to let the boat come in with,
Yeah.
Nobody knew that. At least we didn't know that. And he called my mother, and he was crying, and he came home, and they were both crying.
You remember that?
Oh, I remember that very well. It was just horrible.
Yeah, April 1945. Yeah.
And I started collecting everything about FDR at that time. Scrapbooks. I have an album, my FDR scrapbook, which showed the Daily News had this great picture of him being buried, and with the quote, home from the, home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the bum. And I had all of that. So I was involved in my class politics at Hunter, and I ran for president of my class in junior year. So I was president in my junior year and senior year of my class, and I got to give the commencement talk. Now, I had never talked in public before. And I remember writing a speech and practicing in front of a mirror for a zillion times. And that was it. So I was really a Bamak, a big man on campus at
So that was so
Hunter
different than
College.
high school, wasn't it? Hunter College was so different
Hunter.
for you
Oh, totally,
than high
totally,
school.
totally different. Now, I was president in my junior year of the Young Socialist Club. Now, it's interesting because in 1960, I was invited to go to Cuba. The revolution, Castro had taken over, and we were invited to meet Castro. And I didn't fly, I was scared stiff of flying. So a friend of mine, Eddie Archer, who was my vice president, who I'm still very close to, went to Cuba.
Wow, and you missed that. I was a young socialist at one point, had the card, everything.
Yeah, I mean,
We know.
but I later became a card-carrying member of the ACLU. That was my card that I carried.
It was safe to carry that one. My father once said I had that card. He said, "You better burn that thing. If you get stopped and they find that in your wallet, they're going to lock you up for a long time. You can be that, just you don't have to carry a card."
Sage advice.
Yeah.
Now, at Hunter, I fought for free tuition. Hunter College, in those days, you paid at Hunter. I paid $50 a year for books, and that was it. There was no tuition. And it was great. And when I graduated, I joined the Alumni Association and had an office at Roosevelt House, 4749 East 65th Street is where Sarah Roosevelt gave to her son and his wife a townhouse. Connected, they lived in 49, she lived in 47, and they had an elevator so she could cross over whenever she wanted. It was, to me, it was wonderful. And
what did you major in?
Political science. So I was always going to be a lawyer because I thought law was all about politics. And when I got to law school, I realized it had nothing whatsoever to do with politics. And so I dropped out after a year at Fordham and then took a year working for Seagram's, traveling around the country, putting in doing marketing, decanter studies, etc. At Christmas time, 7 of us would go to a city like Chicago, and we would all work in Chicago for a week, and then we would all go to different cities. So I went to Quad Cities, Moline, Aurora, East St. Louis. It was just interesting.
Now, did you travel by train, bus? Because you didn't
I
drive?
My first day, my first trip, my boss came in and said, "It's Friday." He said, "Monday morning you'll be in New Orleans, and here's your flight tickets, etc." And I said, "I don't fly." He said, "Then you're not working for us." So I flew. I panicked, got on a plane, a big jet, and I said to the guy, what I did discover, all the guys who flew with me, none of them would sit near me. So I was sitting with 2 strangers, and I said, "Where are the parachutes?" And this guy next to me said, "First flight?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We're going to have so much fun." Wasn't fun for me. But within an hour, I was just at home. I thought it was...
So you got over it.
I thought it was wonderful.
And you flew back?
Yeah. And then I flew Trans-Texas from Lake Charles to New Orleans, I mean, I flew a lot. But a year later, we were forced down by a lightning storm, and that was the end of my flying. Theoretically, it was the end, because one of the guys I became good friends with in law school, Vic Ludmira, was a Marine veteran, and he owned his own plane, a seaplane, and he lived on Greenwood Lake, New York. And he had an office in Warwick, later became a judge. And Vic said, come on, we'll fly over. We're in Warwick. I said, we'll fly over to Greenwood Lake and we'll land on the water. And I said, So we get to the airport, and he said, can you hold this, please? And I'm holding it. I said, what is this? He said, it's the engine. Because he hadn't flown in a while, and birds had made nests, right? So he had to clean the nest out. And at that time, I was dating a young woman named Sharon, who was a stewardess for TWA. And she said, oh, of course you have to fly. So we flew. And Vic and his future wife, Mary Ellen, were in the front. Sharon and I were in the back. And you go over a mountain to go to land on the water. And Vic said, I'm not going to clear the mountain. And I'm panicking. And of course he did. And we landed on the water. And we all jumped out of the plane. It was great. It was great.
So how long would you do that? Did you go back to law school then?
Yes. And I graduated. I missed a year. And I graduated.
Any particular focus
No,
in the
there
law?
was no. But what happened in law school, at Fordham Law School, there was a cross on the wall, and every morning before class, you had to do the Our Father. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And I had it memorized, and I spoke louder than anybody else. And after 2 weeks, the priest, Father Quinn, we don't do that anymore. We don't do that. And I actually studied in law school. I was never that bright. And I got in torts, I got a 60, which was a 5-credit course. And that would have doomed me. I was the anchor man for first year. I was the last guy in. I had the lowest grade to pass. And I remember one of my friends in the second year called me up because he had been traveling and he hadn't seen the grades. And he said, did you get in? I said, yeah. He said, oh, then I got in. In my third year, I became friends.
Pause a second. I'm going to switch over to another. That one's full more. Okay.
In my third year, I became friends with faculty. I'm not sure exactly how that happened or why, but one of the interesting things was that Dean Mulligan, who was the dean of the school, had a faculty reception. I crashed, and I put on his name tag. And he came in halfway through, and he saw me, and he was really, and our corporation counsel, who taught corporation, Marty Fogelman, stepped in front of him and said, may I ask who you are, sir? And he said, I'm Dean Mulligan. He said, you can't be, sir. He's Dean Mulligan. See his name tag? And Mulligan looked at me and said, well, if you're Dean Mulligan, here's the bill for tonight's reception. And Joe Crowley, who taught trusts or something, saw me in the hall one day. It was just prior to graduation. Prior to my last term. And he said, and he shouted out, "Let's give a B for Berkowitz!" It was extraordinary. And I took my final exams, and trusts, taxation. There were 5 essays, which I, open book, I omitted all of them. I didn't know anything. There were 60 true or false and 40 points on that. And I'm sitting, and it takes, you know that the faculty does not have your name. They have a number on the paper, so they don't know theoretically who they're marking, right, who they're grading. So what happened was that I'm sitting in the cafeteria knowing that I failed. And I'm not going to graduate. And Joe McLaughlin, who taught New York practice, who was the nicest guy of all, he came in a half hour later, and he said, calls me out, and he says, "Congratulations, barrister." And I said, "No, I failed. He said, "You passed." I said, "How would you?" He said, "You're number 4. He gave me my number. He said, "All your teachers are in my office now. We're grading your papers. You passed." And everybody was overly generous in my finals. And I wound up in the 50 percentile, where I was at the end. So for constitutional law, I received a 98. Interesting.
It's the ACLU in you.
Now, I have to say, Fordham was interesting. And I learned a lot about people's reactions. I'm sitting in constitutional law with Leonard Manning, and someone came in and said, "President Kennedy has been killed." And you're sitting there shocked. And Manning went right on with his lecture. He didn't bat an eye. He went right on. And I got up and walked out. I didn't understand any of this. And then they found out that Oswald had killed him. And there were guys sitting in the cafeteria plotting a defense for Oswald. Not Republicans or anything, but it was too much for me. Too much for me.
Wow.
I took the bar, did not pass. It was the same day that Adlai Stevenson died in London, with Marietta Tree, who was a close friend of his, who I later met when she was the head of the Citizens Committee for New York, where I worked. I never went back to law, and I started my job career.
You never went back, took the bar again?
Never.
Never practiced at all?
Never did anything. I still have a framed diploma. But when you tell people that you're a law school graduate, they attribute to you more smarts than you actually have. They assume you know all these things.
Every kind of law.
Now, I called for jury duty one day, and during the voir dire process, the counsel is asking you questions, and I said, "I'm a law school graduate." And he looked at the card and he said, "Mr. Berkowitz, this case is so simple, even an attorney could understand it." I loved it. It was true. It was interesting.
Were your parents proud that you had gone to law school? They didn't expect that? Did they want you to go to law school? Was that part of the reason you went to law school? Or was it the politics?
I never wanted, you know, I never knew what I wanted to do with my life. I never knew. I always admired people who knew I'm going to become a priest. I'm going to become a lawyer. I'm a doctor. I was never that way. I never knew. I never knew. So this was a way of putting off the draft.
Yeah.
You know, and forestalling by several years what I was going to have to do. Yes, my parents were very proud. My mother especially, you know, I was the shining boy. I went to college. My brother got a job. I went to college. But when David decided to retire and my brother became the third owner of the business, my brother was now a millionaire. We're having dinner one night, and he said to me, it's so weird. Cousins who never bothered to talk to me now call me for business advice. I want to go back for a minute to Cousin Kenny getting married. It was a great affair. It was wonderful. And a month later...
Let me double check one thing. Mort, I want to make sure. Okay.
1 month later, after the wedding, after the honeymoon, her family discovered that Cousin Al, was not worth money, and they had the wedding annulled. They had the marriage annulled. So Kenny was a bachelor again, and eventually he met Doris, and that was it. That was it. They fell in love, they got married, had 2 kids, and happily ever after.
What happened to the first wife?
Wilma, I have no idea. Her parents wanted her to be married to someone affluent.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that happen once, yeah. It turned out the same way.
Interesting.
I want to go back to school. When you were in high school, was there any teacher you really liked that made an impression that you came close to?
No. I did well in English. I debated. I enjoyed that very much. Erasmus was so large a school. Barbara Streisand went there. She graduated 2 years after me. Neil Diamond went there. But, you know, you figure with all those kids, there's some people who will do very well.
Yeah.
And right next door to me, to Erasmus, was the Astor Theater, which showed foreign films. And I worked there as an usher. And if you went to a movie in those days, it stayed there until sales were gone. So I saw Aida for maybe 80 performances. And the elephants marching in, and Aida! And I would go home in my sleep, and I would see elephants. I mean, it was extraordinary. I mean, it was just interesting. Now I go back to Flatbush Avenue. It's totally different. Totally different.
In what way?
Stores are all different. They're all Caribbean or Jamaican or some ethnicity. And there are vendors on both sides. illegal vendors lining the streets, etc. Now, every Sunday night, after lox and bagels in the morning, we would go for Chinese food, because that's what Jews did on Sunday night. They went to a little Chinese restaurant, and my father drank water like there was no tomorrow. My father would constantly call the waiter over, until at one point the waiter picked up the skirt to see if he had been dumping it. Now, we sat in a small kitchen at home. There was a window. My brother always sat with his back to the window. My mother sat at the head of the table because she was serving dinner. And the window was always open a bit. We did not know this until many years later. My brother dumped all of his vegetables out the window. Out the window. Nothing green ever touched my brother's lips. Trust me, that was true. That was true.
Let me ask you, how religious was your family? I mean, did you go to synagogue?
We were religious in that I was going to be bar mitzvahed. That was my brother. I believe there were two synagogues near me, Temple Beth Emeth and Temple Shari Torah. And one was conservative and one was Reform. And I believe that the reason that I'm Reform is because it was cheaper than the conservative synagogue. And I took to it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I was always happy to get up and recite, and especially on the high holy days, in the afternoon, services didn't continue, but there were readings. And I was allowed to read for an hour or two. I thought it was terrific.
What age were you? At what age were you at this?
14, 15, after I was bar mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my bar mitzvah was with two other kids. I remember Stephen Albert and Chuck Bedane. Chuck's father was Al Bedane, who was a very legendary basketball coach at Erasmus Hall for generations. And we still communicate periodically. I have no idea what happened to Al. I'm sorry, Al, to Stephen. I don't know, but I know what happened to Charles. And we went anywhere in the neighborhood we wanted. I mean, there was no danger, no fear, no nothing.
Was the whole neighborhood Jewish?
Up to maybe Cortelia Road, and at that point, because the church was there, I assume it was not. My Aunt Gert lived in a boarding house with her husband. They had a room, and Gert's eyes were very bad. And my Uncle Bill was a short order cook in bars. His father was a very well-known minister in Canada. But Bill just went through life as a short order cook and a confirmed drunk. And one day when Aunt Gert went to the hospital to have eye surgery, my mother said, "Go with Dad to see how Uncle Bill is." And we got there, and he was sprawled on the floor. There were empty bottles of liquor all around. He had gone to the bank, taken all their money out, and wasted it all on alcohol. But he was my uncle, and I loved him. But I just couldn't understand that at the time.
Alcoholism's very rare in Jewish families, isn't it, Mort?
He was not Jewish.
Oh.
His father was a chief minister or clergyman in Methodist, whatever, in Canada.
Oh.
Alcoholism in Jewish families is rare, but not that rare. I mean, people drink, they mask it over. I mean, we live in stereotypes, Jews are good in business because we weren't allowed to be in anything else. So you had to pick something.
You don't drink, do you?
I drink Baileys now and then. But no, I really don't drink.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never seen you drink anything really.
But I had 3 times in my life so drunk that I didn't know if I was coming or going. One of the jobs that I had early on, I did a Christmas catalog for Maison Blanche, which was a big department store in New Orleans.
When you say you did it,
I worked for a firm that did catalogs.
right?
And I was assigned to a group that did the one for Maison Blanche.
Okay.
And when it was over, there was the art director had a big party, and I had a bottle of gin myself. And I had my pay, some $600 in my pocket, which was, you got paid every month. So that was my monthly money. And I got in a cab, and the next thing I knew was a couple of days later, I woke up in my bed. The cab driver went through my wallet, found the address, took me home, brought me upstairs. He didn't take anything. I was on a ski trip at Hunter College and drank excessively, came back, and just interesting stories. And that was it. I had had enough.
You remembered that hangover, did you?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah.
And pause 1 second. So, when you got out of law school, what was the first job? You'd taken that year off and you went with Seagram's.
So, I now have a degree, and I have no idea what I want to do. So I went through the want ads, and I found a job with the welfare department of the city of New York. And I got a job. I was hired to be a welfare inspector. So I went my first day in a suit, and you had to the left or to the right when you walked in was a row of supervisors, one sitting behind the other. And then to the right or the left were 8 seats across going straight back. And that's where we were. We knew nothing. We were not trained. They told us, you make an appointment, you see the client, etc. And I remember and I had 50 cases. I remember the first day very, very vividly. I interviewed this woman. I came back to the office, I sat down, and the guy behind me said, "You just went to your first client, correct?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Could you stand up, please?" I stood up. He said, and when you went in, she offered you a chair. It was against the wall, correct? I said, yes. He said, take your jacket off. I was covered with roaches. Roaches all over me. I quickly went outside and threw up. I just couldn't believe it. I came back, I said, how did you know? He said, I knew, because it happens to everyone. He said, what you do in the future, when you go in and they offer you a chair, you put it in the middle of the room and you hit it against the floor. And that takes care of that. The roaches will scatter and you'll be all right. I went back. I made an unannounced call several weeks later, and the door was open, and I walked in, and there was a little baby in the crib playing with the roaches. The mother was not around. I waited for a while, no mother. I went back to the office and wrote up the baby should be removed from the house. I wrote it up, I gave it to the supervisor, who then called me over and said, we can't do that. And I said, wop, 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 wop. If we did that, we would have to do it all over. This is not a lone case. The mother was a hooker. She was out working, left the baby alone, and that's what happened in neighborhoods, and I quit. I worked there for 2 months total, and I left. And then I got a job. My next job for 2 months was doing Christmas catalogs. And I remember going to the art director's office to bring him copies of what he had done, and he was the best looking man I've ever seen. And he had pictures of good looking men all over. And one of them was a close friend of his, Rock Hudson, who I then knew was gay before Doris Day knew.
Page 6. Right?
I did that until January when it came out, and then the job was over. I got a job, my third job, which I thought, I was the personnel officer at an army base in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which is the Army security base. Everyone is G2. Army security. I didn't drive. I took the bus up there. I was able to go to the officers' club for dinner, for whatever.
And you weren't enlisted?
It's a civilian job. So I'm walking around in a suit, and when soldiers saw me in a suit, they knew I was intelligence. They would cross the street. They didn't want to deal with me. I became friendly with a sergeant who had just come home from Vietnam, and he was telling me stories of hookers who were 12 years old. He had a bayonet soldier who was either 12 or 13. We hear it, you just assume different things, but the reality was horrible. It was horrible. And I realized that I needed to drive. And I got a bus, and I took the written test and I passed. And I got back to the base. My boss called me in and fired me. Obviously, I wasn't living up to what they expected. I knew nothing about my job. truthfully. And I'm panicking. I have all my clothes up there. I assume this is a full permanent job. So all my belongings are there. My best friend, Ted Mayerson, may his soul rest in peace, who was in the Army, trained at Fort Devens, was home, on vacation, on leave, and drove up to surprise me at Fort Devens that we'd go on a little trip together.
Worked out.
An hour later, all my stuff was in the car and back to New York. So now I've had 3 part-time jobs. What am I going to do? So I went over to Carl Schurz Park, which is near Gracie Mansion. It's a public park right next to it. And I'm sitting there, and this beautiful redhead came by, and she's sitting on a bench, and we started talking. She worked for Ted Bates, which was an ad agency, and before long, we decided we would go into business together. We would open up a singles club. Okay? We would open up a singles club.
So what did it do?
We dated for a short period of time, and we realized that we didn't like each other. And I didn't want to have a partner who blah, blah. So I bought her out. I had a friend, an attorney came in who figured out the price with her, and I bought her out. I had a friend at ABC News, a guy named Ben Blank, who was a well-known collector. He was the graphics director for ABC News at the time. And I made a brochure for Mix, my singles club. He designed there were 70 people there, artists. One of them designed this, and I stood on street corners on the east side giving out flyers, etc. We were going to be the non-computer dating service to run against Match, with Operation Match, which was a computer out of Cambridge. We ran dances, we ran ski trips. Eventually, we did a lot of stuff. And I was living a really interesting life. I mean, I did nothing at all during the day, except occasionally giving stuff out. And I would go to a party at night. I would put on a dinner jacket. I would greet people at the door. And it was wonderful. I mean, I remember going over to a group of women, asking one to dance, and she said no. And I said, then you have to leave. If you don't dance with me, you have to leave. And a friend said to her, you came here to dance, dance. It was an interesting experience, which I did ultimately for 7 years. And I ran in New York, Boston, Philly, and Washington. I lived on Amtrak. I had friends in each city. We had some really interesting times.
Now, were you dating anybody exclusively during that period?
Yes, in each city. Not this.
Now I want to know the whole story.
Judy can never see this tape.
Right. We'll edit that.
Okay, as long as we
How old were you? What age period was this? Like 20, 21?
24.
24 to
around there.
31.
No, it had to go. I did it till 35. So let's say I was 26, 27. Because on my 35th, you had to be 21 to 35 to get into the club, to a party. And my brother called me on my 35th birthday and said, early in the morning, he said, well, I guess you can't go to your own parties anymore. It was interesting because I went from a shy around women guy to knowing I could do anything. I always had a friend who I would leave with. I had friends in all the cities. I had employees in each city. Now, when I wanted to go to Washington, which is a story you'll like, or you won't like, about how stupid someone can be, I needed to do a franchise, an event. I needed to set up in Washington. So I took an ad in the Washington Post. And a woman answered. She worked for NIH, National Institute of Health. I went down there to meet her, and they buzzed me in, and I'm talking to her. And after a half hour or so, she was not particularly focused, and it suddenly dawned on me she was a patient. And I said, how long have you been a patient here? And she said, a number of years. So I had done this thing, feeling like a little bit of an ass when I got home. There was a guy, I used to run house parties every Friday night. I would rent an apartment from someone and do a wine and cheese party, and I would take an ad in the New York Post, because the Post was the place that had a singles page of everything. And I had a house party. And a guy who came every week said to me one day, he's moving to Washington, and it'd be a great thing. We could do it, we get an apartment for him down there, and he'll use it during the week, and on Friday, I have a party. So I would make $50, $75 a week, after expenses. And my friend Al Brownfeld, who worked in Washington, I said, Al, why don't you go to a party that, let me know what's going on. And he sent me a note. He said, great success. He had over 250 people there at $3 each. That's big money. When I got the report from this guy, I had 112 people. And I knew all this time for 2 years I was getting ripped off. I called the managing agent, I canceled my lease, and that was that. Then I just rented big spaces around 15th Street, big hotel there, and I ran dances there.
In Washington?
Yeah. In Philly, I rented a hotel and an art gallery, the Kenmore Art Gallery, which was wonderful. In Boston, I was at 1234 Soldiers Field Road in Brighton. I ran there once a month, and everything was terrific.
Were you making money at it?
Yeah, not great money, but I'm doing hundreds a week.
Yeah.
And I have no expenses. I lived...
And the atmosphere was great. Going to parties, not bad.
It's too much. You gotta stop. It's too much. Irving got tired. So, I got job to fill my days with Federation of Jewish Philanthropies as a fundraising assistant, where I, with my law degree, I made $75 a week. And I did that for 3 months, left that, and got a job, another part-time job, which I don't recall now. And then I was recruited back to Federation to run the lawyers division and the liquor division. I shone. First I was hired to replace a guy who was being forced to retire at 65, who did not want to retire. Sidney Goldstein. Nice guy, but I had a splitting headache every day. He yelled. He didn't want me there. I understood. And I finally thought of a way to get him on my side, or at least to deflect. I ran the liquor division there. And 1 year I decided to honor the memory of Samuel Brofman. Samuel Brofman was the liquor industry. He was a bootlegger. He was let's say the godfather of liquor. And I got a call from Edgar Brofman's office. I don't know if you know the name. Okay. His secretary said, Mr. Brofman has decided to be chairman of the event this year. Okay. Now, it was incredible to me. At the dinner, you would have all of the liquor people second in commands. Nobody, you don't get the top guys. Everything was top shelf. And guys would come in and speak about, make a special gift of $1 million, of $500,000 as a one-time tribute. Edgar got up and gave a gift with his brother Charles of $200,000. The foundation, the Seagram Foundation, gave $500,000. Edgar personally gave. There was several $1 million more than had ever been collected. I was feeling great. Now, by that time, UJA had merged, because I was 73, the war had come. And UJA and Federation had merged. And Murray Peters took over as the fundraising guy. He was the vice president. He took over. And Peters had run the liquor division for UJA. Seagram's never gave anything to UJA because Sam Brofman started the World Jewish Congress, and that's where they gave their money. So he was pissed. And I was called in with my immediate boss, and I was yelled at. Are you looking at this? There are 30 liquor stores that didn't give this year. I never went after the little stuff. I went after the big stuff. I raised millions more. We're talking about guys that would give $100. I left there crying. Unless you improve, we're going to let you go. An hour later, Ernie Michel, who was from the Holocaust, a survivor, who was the president of United Jewish Appeal, called me in with my immediate boss, Ron Miller, and he said he was looking over last night, and it's clear that I am the future of fundraising at United Jewish Appeal. And he was so bop, 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 bop. And I walked out of there having been castigated here and praised here. And I said to Ron, does this make sense? He said, no, let's get a drink. None of that made any sense at all. Now, what I did later on, when I did events, I would always try to honor someone well-known, have someone well-known giving the award and having an actual award. I ran the lawyers division, and the Proskauer Award had been given out in the name of Judge Proskauer, and there was a bust made of him that was done every year. I wanted one done of Samuel Brofman. And it was $900, and Murray Peters said, we're not paying for this. Get your friends at Seagram's to pay for it. So when I was at Seagram's, I became friends with a guy named Gil Rabin, who became a vice president, and Gil said, I'll pay for it, don't worry about it. That was my experience there. And what happened, I went home, and I had started organizing block associations. People who lived on a block, getting them together to do good deeds on the block, getting people to know each other, et cetera, et cetera. And there was city was in financial crisis.
What years were these? More early 70s?
Yeah, 73, 74. That was when Ford said to the city, drop dead.
Yeah.
So there was a group that was founded, the Citizens Committee for New York City. And it became my life for the next 7 years. But I called up a friend who was volunteering for them, and he said, call this guy Dennis L.E. Call him. So I called Dennis, who is a genius, and I spoke to him, and he said, there were no employees. And he said, if you ever want a job as our community affairs director, let me know. I said, I do. He said, great, come in, interview, great, and that was it. And I got a job. There was another part-time job that I just remembered that I had. Again, I thought it was a full-time job, but it wasn't. Junior Achievement. You know JA?
Yeah.
Training young people. Okay. So I did that. I was the director in New York and the assistant director nationwide. And I did that for 3 months and got fired. I got fired at a Christmas party. They fired me. And my boss said, you're going to take the next month and you're going to look for a job. I know you already have a job, but huge federation at that point. I know you have a job, but you'll come in every day and you'll tell me how you're looking for a job and blah, blah, and you'll get paid here and you get paid there. So I did that. That was when I was a fundraiser, $75 a week. So it was interesting. I did that, and after a month, I said, Harold, I got a job, great! And that was it. So I now had a new job. And
Where were you living at this time? Had you moved
311 West 84th.
So you'd moved into Manhattan.
I moved into Manhattan. I got a studio apartment for $125 a month. And I bought a waterbed. I lived on the first floor. And with the waterbed, it ever sleep on a waterbed?
I had one, yeah.
Well, it was the worst night's sleep I ever had. Because when it went this way, I went that way, and blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, I had 24 hours with no sleep. Second night, I just lay down and fell asleep. Oh my God, was it great. And I'm having fun with my block association. I knew nobody on the block, and I had my days free. I went to the corner when I had my singles club. I went to the corner of 84th and West End, and I met a guy who was an actor who worked nights, big black guy, equally 6'5", great dramatic voice. And when somebody would walk past us, we'd both say, "Hi, neighbor." In those days, this was Crimesville. The 70s on the west side were crime. A. Beam had proclaimed 84th Street as the worst block in the city. I mean, it was horrible. Next to us was a shoot-up gallery. There was an SRO next to us. I mean, it was really horrible. And slowly but surely, things changed. This was before co-ops. So young people wanted to come to the city. You could get an apartment cheap. I formed the Block Association. I was the president of the Block Association. I set up a table, signing people up. Young girls would come by. I need an apartment. I got an apartment for you. I got apartments for dozens and dozens and dozens of people. I knew eventually almost everyone. We had 1,000 people on the block. I ultimately knew 800 by name. Girl comes to me crying. Her landlord doubled her rent. She'd been there a month. I had gotten her the apartment. I said, he didn't mean to do. We walked by, knocked on the door. I said hi to the guy, and I said, "I didn't know you knew it." "Same, forget it." A girl that I was with had a pet dog. The lease said no dogs. Had to get rid of the dog. Said nothing, truthfully now, about monkeys. We rented a monkey. If you know anything about monkeys, monkeys fling shit around all the time. After a while, with the landlord, we negotiated, keep the dog, get rid of the monkey. It was like that. And ultimately, when I got my waterbed, one of my friends put up a sign on the front door. "Mort has a waterbed. Sign up here." And young ladies would, yes. Now, brownstones are very small, the apartments in them. They're basically studios, at most a one bedroom, but small. And so if you wanted to have a party, you needed to have every apartment. And we did. And we got one, and I did not have a stereo, and I went to Macy's, and I paid $500 for a stereo to be delivered on Saturday. Miss Feeney was going to sign for it. It never came. On Tuesday, I went to Macy's, and I took it home. And you know what happened the following Saturday? They delivered my stuff.
Okay.
So I asked Dave Flaxman, my attorney, what do I do? He said, we're going to charge Macy's a warehousing fee. We're going to charge them $25 a day. And when we hit $500, you own it, because they're never coming back to pick it up. It's just not worth it for them it's just not worth it. So at the end of the time, he called me up, he said, you own it, I'll give you $250 for it. And I said, sold. So now we're having this party. In one room, in one apartment, someone is serving food, another one booze, etc. So I go back to my apartment, which is tiny, but it has a waterbed. And there are 6 people laying on my waterbed. I lay down next to someone, and I said, hi, Mort Berkowitz. She said, hi, Gail Brewer. Gail became borough president, and Gail is a very close friend. That's how I met Gail.
In the waterbed.
In the waterbed, which she has told many times at public gatherings. I'm upset about that. There came a point in 1973 when I moved across the street to a real apartment. They would not allow me on the 5th floor to have a waterbed.
Yeah.
The weight was too much.
Yeah.
So I got a friend and we rolled the waterbed out on the street. And numerous friends, including Stiller and Mira and Peter Max, etc., would come by. You lay down on the bed and water is squirting out. It was great. Now, when I moved to 84th Street, I noticed a sign on the corner of 84th and Broadway that it was a sign that Edgar Allan Poe had lived on that block when he wrote The Raven. So I have a block association. I called Ruth Messenger, who was our city councilwoman at the time, and I said, I'd like to propose a name change. I want this to be the Edgar Allan Poe Street. I wrote a letter. She submitted it, and a year later, nothing had ever happened. Nothing had ever happened. And I called her, and she said, Bobby Wagner, who was the head of city planning, the mayor's son, said that it would upset the grid. There's a grid of every street, etc. So I said, okay. When I moved to that apartment, Judy moved in with me. We held 3 parties, fundraising parties. One for Bobby Wagner, from 6 to 9, and from 9 to 11 for Henry Stern, who was, okay. And the next week we held one for a friend, Ed Koch. Okay, so now I do street fairs. I did a block party on 84th Street. It was great. So we created an award, the Edgar. However, we were soon notified by the Mystery Writers of America that they had the Edgar already.
Ooh.
And we were all concerned, but we just changed it to the Raven. It didn't matter to me.
Yeah.
So what happened was that I believed at the time that you have an award, you have someone famous present it, and you give it to someone well-known. So I wrote a letter to maybe 50 or 60 people, well-known people, and Abe Beam, who was the mayor at the time, agreed to come to get the award. He was running for re-election, and he had very little support on the Upper West Side. Al Blumenthal who was the local assemblyman. It was his district, okay. So, and I had Stiller Mira present the, Greek beam at the corner. I get a call from a guy who said he's from Talk of the Town.
From the New Yorker.
And he said he wants to interview me. And I said, I have no time. Beam shows up. Jerry and Ann walk him down. Everything is terrific. And there's a young guy in dungarees says, I want to talk to you. I have no time. At the end of the day, I said, okay. That resulted in a 2-page write-up of me in the New Yorker, Talk of the Town. I mean, fantastic. So I became friends with a number of people on my block. They may be famous people, but they're neighbors. They're neighbors. That's really what they are. And the first one was Peter Max, and well-known artist. And I asked Peter if he would do a poster for me for the block party.
Wow. Anything that he does, or did.
So Peter did that. That was great.
God damn, I missed that part. I missed the part about Judy. And I gotta have it. I'm sorry, I didn't turn it on. I was so listening to the damn story.
Turn it off for a minute.
Okay. So
while I
how'd you
was
meet
working
Judy?
at UJA, periodically I'd go to lunch with a couple of guys, and we go over to Fifth Avenue, and stupid guys would ogle women and all, and one of them turned out to be a guy named Al Hoffman, who turned out to be my father-in-law. And we were friends. And after a fashion, I was in Al's office one day, and there's a picture of 3 women. I said, she's very nice, nice-looking woman. It's my wife. And I said, she's lovely too. It's my daughter Jane, she has a boyfriend. This is my daughter Judy. So eventually, I asked her out. And Al said, I mentioned to Al, I asked her out, but she was busy. And I said, besides, she lives in Brooklyn. She'll meet you in Manhattan. So we went out. It was during Passover, and I observed Passover. So I wound up taking it to a Jewish restaurant. It was a dairy restaurant on 72nd Street. And I was smitten with her. I really was. And I told her I was going to marry her. Even though I would never have thought of getting involved with a Jewish school teacher. But at 37, it was the same year my father got married. I mean, I was hooked. And so I told Judy I was going to marry her. And she responded by going, "Ooh!" Well, we survived that, and that was okay. Now, 84th Street was a dangerous block because you could mug someone on the block. It was dark and run right into the park. So I raised money on the block, and I put in high-intensity sodium lighting. And it revolutionized the street. You could see it all times of the day and night. And Peter Max, who's a neighbor and a friend, he's a night owl. So we would be playing Frisbee after midnight, and after an hour or so, we get in a cab and go to Chinatown and have dinner. Now, I never kept any of the doodles, the small things that he would doodle, because he's a friend of mine. I mean, whoever thought that it would be worth right. So, several nights we'd have dinner. Earlier, I go back to his house, and we're talking, and the phone would ring. I said, "No, dear, no, sorry, not tonight. It was the Pointer Sisters. We're busy. We've eaten, whatever." Another night, phone rings. "We'll be over in an hour." "Where are we going?" "We're going to Columbus," which was a very chic restaurant owned in part by Baryshnikov and many celebrities on Columbus Avenue, and we're having dinner with Keith Richards and a date, a well-known female singer whose name I don't recall. But we're sitting there, the four of us, having dinner, and I have nothing to say to this guy. I mean, it was an interesting evening, but that was it. And Peter had asked me to manage him, which I said no, because what did I know about managing an artist? I mean, but we remained, until his dementia, we've remained friends. So it's interesting. Then there was a story about Judy gave birth to Michael, and on Thursday night for maybe 8 years was volleyball night on West 84th Street. I had permission from the precinct, the 20th precinct. I set up a volleyball net across 84th Street, and people would come to play. And groups from other blocks would come to play. And you have 30 or 40 or 50 people waiting for a game. And at that time, Carolyn Kennedy lived on 84th Street. And on a Thursday night, she got mugged. And as the cop said, because my guys caught him right away. I mean, you don't mug someone on 84th Street on Thursday night.
Yeah.
Any other night, the block is empty. Thursday night, you have all these jocks up and down the block. And they caught him in. Anyway, one night, squad car comes racing down the street. 2 squad cars. And we stop the game. Squad cars pull up. Captain Ferriola from the 20th precinct got out of the car and he said, "Mort, I have 2 things I have to do. I have to see Mike and I have to serve the ball. Which do I do first?" Now it turns out my friend Dave Flaxman had married Flo Ferriola, his daughter, and it was very nice. And it's a small world, very small world. So when I worked at Federation, Gil Rabin from Seagram's had told me, we were friends, and told me a great story. When he got the job, he was so happy. Jack Yogman, who was the president of Seagram's, under Edgar, the owner, was the man in liquor. And he had just hired Gil. And Gil went out and bought some fancy sport coats and slacks. And Jack invited him up to his office and said, "The successful businessman in Seagram's always wears a suit." And right after that, I returned all this clothing, bought some cheap suits, and that was it. So when we would go for lunch, he would always pay. He knew everyone. I mean, and everyone knew him. So one day, I decided to take him out for lunch. I was working at a different place. I had money. I took him for a nice lunch at a restaurant on 59th Street and Park Avenue, very fancy. And Gil said, you know, I've never been here. I said, oh, this is terrific. We ordered a nice lunch, and when I asked for the check, the manager said, I've already put it on the Seagram's account. And I said, Gil, but you told me you've never been here. He said, that doesn't mean that people don't know me. True. So going back to the Citizens Committee, I did a lot of work for them. I started organizing block associations. I wrote books, pamphlets. We had a block association week. We had a session with Mayor Koch, who I've known for a long time, and it's another story. And we had a press conference at Gracie Mansion. And I just want to show you this picture.
Is it Giuliani in there too?
No, that's Harrison J. Golden, who was the city controller. Jane Kalmus, who was our PR director at the Citizens Committee, holding up the sign.
Who's the guy speaking?
Cute. And that's me in a three-piece suit with Jerry and Ann there.
Wow, Mort, that's a great photo. Good looking man.
Yeah. So my Aunt Gert would stay up late at night. Can't see anything. She listened to the radio. And she always listened to Barry Gray. And one night Barry had Still a Mirror on. And he said to Ann, do you know the mayor? Of course we know the mayor, Mort Berkowitz. He's the mayor of our block. And Aunt Gert was couldn't believe it. And she stayed up all night just to call my mother at 9 a.m. and tell her what happened. And then she went to sleep for the day.
Oh, good.
It was a very wonderful time. Very wonderful time. We got to meet so many people. We did so many great things. For this event that I showed you the poster before, we wanted to serve food. And I thought we'd make our own sandwiches. So I went to Zabar's and I gave them a letter on the Block Association letterhead to Saul and Stanley, who were the two owners, who are now both in their 90s. I mean,
And they both are still alive.
Yeah. Not in great shape, but still alive. And I said that I'm from the Block Association, blah, blah. And Saul said, what would you like? And I said, I'd like 50 pounds of salami. And he said, okay. And he said, pick it up on Friday night. The party's the next day. Friday night, after work, I go over to Zabar's, and he goes to the kitchen and he brings out 5 10-pound salamis. And in my best falsetto voice, I said, they're not sliced. And he said, where in our contract did it say sliced salami? You want to slice it? He brings me in the kitchen, gives me a jacket and a slicer, and for the next 4 hours, I'm slicing salami. And if I want to tell you that for a year I didn't eat salami because the smell of salami goes right through you. Unbelievable.
How many different block associations did you organize?
Hundreds.
Really?
I was out 4 nights a week in different boroughs organizing block associations. I considered this my mission.
Now, did you get paid for this, Mort?
I worked for the Citizens Committee.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah. But I never thought of the job as a job, really. I did stuff I really liked. I did one in Brooklyn, the neighborhoods I went to were basically not the greatest. There was a lot of poor people working on their block and doing stuff. And this was during an election year in '76. And I was speaking to this group of maybe 400 people in the audience. And when I got off the subway, Liberty Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue were ripped up. They had been ripped up since Lindsay's days. Nobody had ever done anything with them. And I got over to the facility and I spoke. And I said, how many of you are registered to vote? And a very small number of people raised their hands. And I said, if you want to know why your streets are still the way they are, why crime is rampant, all the people up here are white. Congressman Scheuer, and I name names, if you don't register and you don't vote, you're going to get nothing, blah, blah, and I go through this. And the meeting ended. I got great applause, of course. And the meeting ends, and I said to Scheuer's, one of his aides, can I get a lift at the subway? And he said, no, get one of your friends to take you. So they will walk out. I walk out, and there's a gang of young kids at the corner. And I know I am not going to make it. And I walk back inside, and I go to a woman who had invited me, a woman named Minnie, who was maybe 5'2", and she said, oh, we're going to walk you to the subway. She's married to someone who looked like Roosevelt Grier, maybe 6'5", stocky. He and his friend, equal size, Minnie and I walked, and the gang at the corner was like Charlton Heston splitting the Red Sea.
That rough a neighborhood.
Very rough neighborhood. And I organized throughout the city. And I organized on one particular night, I organized a block association. I spoke. I had an elderly secretary at the Citizens Committee, Edna Alexander, wonderful woman. People would call up, I need a speaker. So one day, Edna says, you're going to the Board of Education here. So I go, and there's maybe 100, 150 people in the audience, and nobody on stage. And I sit down, and I said to this guy next to me, what are we waiting for? We're waiting for a speaker, Mort Berkowitz, who's going to talk about the importance of early childhood education. A subject of which I knew nothing about whatsoever. And all I could think about, when I get back and talk to Edna, I'm going to tell Edna. And I go up on stage, and I said, my name is Mort Berkowitz. I'm with the Citizens Committee for New York City. During the past year, I have organized over 200 block associations. I have spoken before 34 police precinct council meetings. I have spoken to 20 or 30 sanitation councils. And not once did I ever hear anyone or see anyone or have anyone from the Board of Education talk about childhood education. If you think it's so important, why aren't you communicating? no communication, no education. You must get off of your seats. You must go out, talk to people, blah, 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 blah. Great applause. I left and I said, I'll kill that now. So there was...
That's what I came for, Mort.
There was... Brooklyn has changed. Ocean Parkway changed from an all-Jewish neighborhood. There were other ethnicities coming into it. And around Avenue T, there was a very big Mid-Eastern Jewish population. And they had a very big synagogue. And crime was rampant. Police, there were no, crime was rampant. And what happened was that I spoke on safety all the time. And I knew a lot about that. And they called me in to speak, and I spoke. And I gave my normal, and I got a big round of applause. And then the police captain got up, and they started booing him and yelling, and I went back, and I took the mic away from him, and then I went in. You can't blame him. The president of the group, in his brand new Lexus, drove me home to Manhattan, and said to me, if there's anything we can ever do for you, please let me know. I said, actually, there is. And I told him what I needed. Now, let me go back to say that as I'm doing events, we organized a group and we did something for the Hub 3rd Avenue Merchants Association in the Bronx. And we raised a lot of money, but Dr. J's was a big sports store, sneakers, etc. They never came through on their $1,000 commitment. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get the 1,000. Turns out, he was a member of their congregation. And so when I was asked if there's anything, I said, yes, so-and-so owes me $1,000 that he never paid. And he said, by the time you get to your office tomorrow, the check will be there. Cashier's check will be there on your desk. And it was.
Wow.
It was. Very interesting. So I mentioned before about that I had an office at Roosevelt House, and I was really into free tuition, getting it restored. And I was there one night. I did something else with a member of the Alumni Association. We did career counseling. We had different people come down. Judith Christ, who was with the Herald Tribune, a well-known critic. And we had people who were interested in that. We had attorneys come down, talk about law. And I had all these students there. And it ended about 9:30. Everybody left. It was sorority house plan night at Roosevelt House. And then came the dire news of the blackout. I was the only adult in the building with 400 16 and 17-year-old girls. And people started banging on the door. Parents who wanted to get their kids. I was not opening the door. I mean, I would do, it was scary. And my friend Larry Finkelstein again was with the National Guard at the Armory on 67th Street. And in the morning, I had called him, and he and a troop of soldiers came over and took all the girls back to the Armory. I locked the door and went home. Very scary night. Very scary night.
So power did not come back on at all that night.
No.
Did they get it going by the next afternoon? I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, it came back eventually, but the grid somewhere in Canada, whatever, and we're all connected.
Yeah. Damn. 400 girls.
So now, it's our second Edgar Allan Poe Festival, and it's raining out. I mean, it's a horrible day. And there is a guy who lived at 320 West 84th, a drug dealer, who wanted a booth at the street fair. And he said, and I just poo-pooed, and he said, Mort, Poe was ahead. He was into this.
He's cooking.
I mean, it would not be. So, a reporter was there from the New York Times, and we had a man named Engel Conroe, who was the man of Shakespeare, who performed every day in Central Park, dressed in his outfit. And he had a alcove on the block where he lived, his apartment. And 3 times during each day of each fair, he would recite
Julius Caesar or something?
No. The Raven.
Oh, yeah, sure.
The Raven. And this reporter was there from the Times, and he said to him, I feel so bad. It's such a lousy day for you. He said, it is a perfect Edgar Allan Poe day. It sucks. And that made it into the paper. I loved it.
Do they still have it, the Festival of Mort?
No, what happened was co-oping. Everything changed. Young people did not come in the block. People did not move. You don't move from one house to another. You just don't. You die, someone new comes in. But you buy a co-op. As we get older, we spend more time upstairs. I have a young family, so eventually I gave up volleyball. It went by the wayside. But a very interesting little tidbit, there's an Orthodox rabbi who lived at 118 Riverside Drive, where Peter Max lived, Stiller Mira, big, nice co-op. And it was on a Thursday night. He couldn't drive his car in the block because I had the block closed for volleyball. And he said to me, why don't you have volleyball on Friday night? I said, Rabbi, Friday night is Shabbos. You can't do it on Shabbos? And I said, and your granddaughter, Deborah, is turning out to be a beautiful young woman. And he said, Berkowitz, you play volleyball whenever you want. You leave my granddaughter alone. God.
So your son was born. Let me get back to the children. Your son was born, Michael. Then
And he's still Michael.
And Stacy came how long after?
Stacy is about 2 years difference.
So tell me about raising the kids. And they
Judy
grew up
did
there on the 84th.
Judy did a great job of raising the kids. I spent most of my time away. I mean, I worked nights, I worked weekends. So, I mean, Judy really did a great job. Mm-hmm. And Judy wanted to quit teaching and stay home with the kids. And I thought that was a great idea. I could afford it at the time. I mean, we had money coming in. It was fine. And there came a point that the kids entered junior high school. Judy came back to the office with me to work. And that was it. Then I started to get active. Michael went to the computer school. a really good school, part of a junior high school, and right across the street from the public school, where they went with PS 87, and then to the computer school. And I became president of the computer school, of the PA. And the first thing I did in any school I was active in, I had a meeting with the principal to see what he needed and a walkthrough of the building. And we discovered that there was a hole in the roof, and it leaked straight into the gym, which created, over years, wooden peak. So you could not, nobody could have any phys ed at all. And I said, why is this? He said, every year I write up a report to give to the Board of Education, rated 1 to 5. 5 is an emergency that must be fixed now, and it's ignored. So as the head of now the Federation of West Side Block Associations, and knowing and having some clout in the community, I called my assemblyman, Jerry Nadler, who was the head of the State Dormitory Authority. And Jerry came in, took one look, and that was it. And a week later, the workmen were there from the state, fixing the roof. The gym was perfect, great. Rodents were all over the school, again with the principal. And he said, we put in for the exterminator, and nobody comes. Every class had computers, but they were not hooked up. You see, there was a thing called Project Connect, that they would come into a school and hook up all the computers. But the computers had been there for several years. Nobody had ever done anything. It's the Board of Education. Our school ran the largest flea market, which is still there, around, which spits out over $500,000 profit a year, of which we gave $75,000 to the public school. We kept 200, and 200 and change went to the district. Got $200,000. First thing I did, I hired Orkin, the exterminator. They came in, perfect. A year after I graduated, the exterminator from the Board of Ed came in, saw this, got rid of everything, and the rodents were back. I hired a guy named Harry Wilkins, who had a computer company, a neighbor. He lived down at the boat basin on 79th Street. And Harry hooked up everything. And it was wonderful. And he called me one day to say, and it cost 10 grand. I mean, it was chicken. It was nothing. He called me one day to say, in the art department, the chairwoman, she has a $10,000 color printer that she doesn't want hooked up. So I go with an assistant principal to the principal. Prior to this, I sent a letter out to everyone. Do you need anything? You need books, you need this. The principal, through an assistant principal, wanted office furniture. He wanted a nice desk. He wanted a nice chair. We spent $1,000. We bought him good shit. So I went in to see him to tell him about Mrs. So-and-so with the art department. And he said, just as I would not want anyone to come in and sit in my chair or use my table, she does not want anyone to touch her printer. Elliot Sallow goes like this to me. I said, thank you. We walked out, and he said, okay. I wanted a paint job. The halls are in disrepair. I wanted everything spruced up. There is a custodian in every school. The custodian has a budget. The custodian has a man, the fireman, who is his right-hand man. I wanted all this stuff done, and I was told that by union contract, they're not allowed to go over, say, 8 feet. And they will not give permission for anyone else to come in and paint or do fix walls or anything. And it's up to them. They say no, it's no. So I said to the fireman, I need to get this done. I mean, blah, 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 blah. And he said, the boss, whatever his name was, he loves Broadway. Loves Broadway. And I said, I have 4 tickets and 4 seats for a nice dinner for any show that he should happen to, that you guys would want to go to. Needless to say, you want to paint, you want to do this. And we did. I mean, and I attended a meeting of the District 3 of the Board of Ed, the committee that decided all the things on the west side. And a parent got up from a school in Harlem, and this is December, and he wanted to know when his school was getting textbooks. See, that's the difference. That's the difference. If you have a voice and you have enough voices, you can get things done. And if you don't, they should push you aside and go on to someone else, something else.
Squeaking wheel gets the grease.
Yeah. It's sad, but it's true, and it still goes on. And since I had a singles club and I was free during the day, my mother called and said they had an elevator problem in Mom and Dad living in Brooklyn. And she called the housing department, and they were sending an inspector over. Could I be there? Yeah. Good. So the inspector came, and we're talking. And I said, how long have you been with buildings? He said, I've been here X number of years. Older guy. And I said, I have a good friend, an associate at the buildings department. He said, who? I said, Hortense Gable. The commissioner? Yeah, the commissioner and I both went to Hunter College, and we're on committees together, and blah, 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 blah. And he said, what other problems are there in the building?
Yeah. And they got fixed.
Yep.
How long were you at that job, Mort?
Citizens Committee?
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 7 years. And then eventually, change over in staffs, I left there and I started 2 consulting companies. 2 different companies. One was Bold Concepts, which became Bold Concepts. And the other one was Mort and Ray Productions, which became Mort and Ray Productions. And I did events, and I had a consulting company. Now, I knew hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of community groups, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought it would be easy to get jobs from them. Not one. Nobody ever hired me because they always got it for free. They got everything for free. Nobody ever hired me. I got a call one day from Evelyn Patterson, who was the vice president of NYU. And she called and said she had had lunch with Mary Holloway, another friend who did organized on the east side. And she said that Mary told her that I was on my own. She said, I have 3 jobs for you. You're going to run the Washington Square Street Fair, which I did for 20 years. I mean, it was great.
And that was through Mort and Ray, right?
You're going to be in charge of the Greenwich Village Merchants Association. And you're going to run the George Washington Birthday Ball for all of those people that lived, fancy people, that lived around the park, around the square. That was the most fun I ever had. I did things that just great. We did a costume. I would come in costume. Judy would dress up as Martha. I would dress up as George. And one night, there used to be a place called Papa's Place, which was an ice cream place on 13th Street, 6th Avenue. Well, the ball is over, and we're walking on 6th Avenue, and a car pulls up with young guys in it and yells, "Faggots!" We get into Papa's Place, and the owner, who we knew, said, "Everybody stands for the President and First Lady." So Ariel Cogan, who was a prominent attorney with Seward and Kissel, who was the chairwoman of the George Washington Association, said to me one day, we invited the Parks Commissioner, the Manhattan Parks Commissioner, has given us permission to auction off a reception on the top of the arch. Who knew there was the top of the arch? I mean, it was incredible. So I'm auctioning. I mean, okay, yeah. Someone bid $1,000. I said, great. And I knew the commissioner. And we have $1,000. Commissioner, that is so great. Thank you. Commissioner has now allowed us to do a second one. And we did that. I got the same 1,000. Commissioner, that is too generous, a third one. I see, Judy Berkowitz has a hand up. She never had a hand up. Sold. So we get there. We did the first one. And we get there with my friend Harry Wilkins, the computer guy, and his wife. Harry thought he could do anything in the world. I mean, he's terrific. And we get there, and the Parks Commissioner is there, along with the guy who runs the arch, who's in charge of the arch. And I have 18 friends there, 9 couples, with shrimp, we're going to have a whole to-do. The combination lock does not work. They can't get in. They've been trying for an hour. And Harry said to me, do you want to open it or should I? I said, no, you go ahead, Harry. What's the combination? They told him. And 1, 2, 3 was open. And the commissioner said, I don't understand. He said, you told me 14. Well, I went the other way. You told me this. I went the other way. Pop, it's open.
Yeah.
And to get up there, you have a circular stairway that is filthy. Nobody, I mean, except for the graduation at NYU each year when some of the faculty were invited up there. But they had chairs and tables there. And if you're looking one way, you see the Empire State Building. The other way, you see the arch of the World Trade Center. Wow. Great evening. I mean, it really was. It was a great evening. Really, really, it was terrific.
It sounds like it.
I just found pictures, and so Robert was there with his wife and a lot of friends, and some not here anymore and whatever, but it was fun. It was fun. So I get called to do, there is the West Side Spirit, which is a West Side newspaper, run by a friend of mine, Tom Allen. And Tom did Spirit Awards. They gave out awards. I was a judge each year. So and he had a paper on the east side, Our Town, and they said, Our Town thanks you. Great, so I'm a judge. There's a big cocktail party. I'm at the party, and he introduces me to the mother of Howard Dean, who lives there, and says, I want you to meet Mort. We know Mort. Mort organized our block association several years ago. How are you? Blah, 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 blah. I said, so how is Howard? You know, we were so shocked. First of all, he wants to go to med school in Vermont. Fine. He has a girlfriend. She's Jewish. We are Jewish. And then he calls one day, says, you have to change your registration. You're now going to be Democrats. We've always been Republicans. And then suddenly he calls us, I'm lieutenant governor now, I'm running. It's amazing. What a lovely woman. And a friend, I didn't recall being in their apartment, but...
Yeah. What happened to him, Mort? Howard Dean, he just went off the charts, didn't he?
He was active for a number of years. I don't know what he's doing now.
I haven't heard that.
I'm sitting in a Broadway show. This is after the... And...
Going to New Hampshire.
Now, I'm trying to think of her name. Joan Jett. You know Joan Jett? And the Blackhawks?
I don't.
One of the popular women's groups of all time. And Joan is sitting, and her manager is sitting next to us. And Judy and I are talking, and Joan said, I was there. I was standing next to Howard. We didn't hear a thing. The noise was so great, we didn't hear a thing. And yet, everyone at home heard that scream. Nobody there heard anything.
Well, that's the thing we always remember him for. It killed him. Yeah, killed the campaign. You win and then you blow it in the acceptance speech.
It's interesting. It's interesting.
Now I want to go back to Mike and Stacy.
I want to go back to my father.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my father had 3 sisters. Aunt Anne, who was the youngest. Aunt Lily, who was the second oldest. And Aunt Dinah. Now, Aunt Dinah, who I don't recall meeting, one day we got in a car, Mom, Dad, Aunt Anne, and I, and we went down to Coney Island. Dinah she just mentally, she was off. And she got a place, a little shack to live in, away from her family and all. Nobody knew what happened to her. Aunt Lily and her husband Dave had a luncheonette on Coney Island Avenue. Aunt Anne, whose husband walked out on her, had 2 children, Barbara and Monty. Barbara, they were our closest family because we always spent time with them. I mean, we always spent time with them. On Saturday nights, my mother and Aunt Ann were partners in casino. My father and Lily were partners. And my father and Lily were notorious cheats. You would always put a picture card at the bottom. You would shuffle until something, and then you would cut. My mother would cut the cards, he would put them back the same way. Hours and hours of, oh God. But it was fun. I mean, we loved that. And Monty was an athlete, and my father loved that and was very close to Monty. He just passed recently. Now, Lily had a daughter and a son. The son's name was Sidney. Sidney was a great athlete. Sidney wanted to play football. Lily talked to my father, talk him out of it, they get hurt, blah, 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 blah. I won't say he worshipped him, but he loved Sidney. And then nobody saw anyone anymore. And one day, my parents were at something, a day with Sidney and his family. And my father was just in heaven. I mean, it was great. All those years of blah, blah, and I became friends with Sidney's son, Mike, and Michael and his father were playing basketball. And they finished the game, they went inside, Mike got his father a glass of water, he came back, his father was dead on the floor. He'd had a heart attack and just died. And I would hitchhike. I used to hitchhike all the time. I would hitchhike up to Cornell to visit friends, and I would stop along the way to go to Harper College, which was SUNY Binghamton now. And Mike was on the basketball team there, so I would spend the day there and then continue up to see my friends Howie Morantz and Eileen. Now, Howie was a guy who lived around the corner growing up. Good friends. The day of his wedding, we were all the guys were playing baseball down at the parade grounds. And about 4 o'clock, Howie said, well, I have to go home and get dressed. And we continued to play. And then Howie came back, apparently, and was playing, and the wedding is due to start. There's no Howie. Howie comes in an hour late. He said, I came back, I found another game. So now they go to Europe together. Eileen was a very simple young lady, no great thoughts, they got married. They went to Europe for their honeymoon. A week later, I got a postcard from Eileen about all the museums that they went to in London. I got a postcard the same day from Howie. He's in Paris, balling it up. At the end of the summer, ultimately I said to Howie when everybody's back, what happened? He said, I always wanted to go to Europe as a bachelor. And now that I was married, I saw no reason why I couldn't do that. So on the first day, I gave Eileen money. Have a good time, meet me at this hotel. Blah. Okay, great. So now it's raining out. She's wearing a trench coat, as we all wore the same trench coat. She's standing on the corner. A hooker comes up to her and says, excuse me, this is my corner. She said, no, I'm just waiting for my husband, blah, blah, blah. Howie comes by, sees the two of them, looks this one up and down, looks this one up and down, says, all right, you. And the hooker is yelling at you. They came back to New York. They stayed married. They went up to Cornell. They stayed there for many years, and then he divorced her.
And that's who you'd go up there and visit.
Yes, and she fixed me up. I was single at the time. She fixed me up, and they drove a Volkswagen. And we get to pick up my date. We go to my date's place. She is 6'5", in heels. I'm not used to looking up to someone like that, you know, right?
As tall as you are.
And I said, Eileen, why? I said, well, she hasn't had a date all year, and I thought it was... So on the first day that we were together, we went to a smorgasbord in downtown Ithaca. It was $2.50 for all the food you could eat. We got there at 12 when they opened. I've always loved roast beef. I had 6 slices of roast beef. I had an appetite that would not quit, as you're about to find out. And the manager came over, or the owner came over and said, that's your limit on roast beef. And I see a guy walking in with a big platter of deviled eggs. And I said, I love deviled eggs. And I finished off 100. Every egg on that tray, I finished. And I will tell you, I was so sick to my stomach after that. He gave us back our money. Get out of my restaurant.
Oh, 1 second. I'm going to flip over to another. Okay. Okay.
Aunt Anna, who was 19 when my mother was born, had 2 daughters, Virginia and Betty. Virginia and her husband were into square dancing, and they were socialists, maybe more, who knows. And Betty we didn't see much of anyone. I mean, my mother probably did. I remember Aunt Anna's husband, Willie, who smoked a cigar and could do those rings. That's what I remember most about Aunt Willie, Uncle Willie. We used to go to Jones Beach, and I was walking into the water. I was probably 10, and I kept walking, and they were all on the... Uncle Bill saw that I was walking the wrong way and came in, otherwise I would have drowned. And he pulled me out. Interesting.
Wow.
He also took me fishing. The one time I went fishing down at Sheepshead Bay, and I didn't catch anything. And what he did, he went across the street, bought a fish, put it on the hook, threw my thing in the water, and, oh, you got it! And I pulled up a fish.
What a good uncle.
What a guy, what a guy. And then we found him drunk, and he died shortly thereafter of cirrhosis of the liver.
Mm. Mm. How many of your family are still living of that generation, Mort? Any of them?
Doris, Robin's mother, is alive, but they're all gone. They're all gone. My daughter had wanted to interview my mother, but she didn't get around to it. And there's so many questions that we all have that nobody has any answers because nobody's there.
Yeah. You gotta capture them. Yeah. Yeah.
Mike asked about doing this too.
Did he?
And I said that you were doing it. He said, "Oh, okay, I was going to do it, but okay."
Good. I just I'll pause it there because. Okay.
So I had a crush on Dina Lebensfeld, and in junior high school, we had a prom, and Dina lived down the block, but I would never ask her. And our mothers got together, and I escorted Dina to the prom. And 1 hour later, she went home with someone else. And my friend Arlene Rothline, who was a singer then, sang "Jilted, I've Been Jilted." It was a great song. I did the most daring thing I could think of after that. I went out and bought a pack of Pell Mell cigarettes, and I smoked one and thought I'd die. I didn't know how to inhale, exhale, or whatever, and I was choking. But my view of women, that influenced greatly. And it took many years before I changed that. At my 25th high school reunion, which I helped organize, I told Judy she should come, blah, blah, blah. And she came, and we saw Dina. And immediately I started crying, and Dina started crying as we ran to each other and embraced. And I said, "Why?" She says, "You weren't popular, you were just there, you just," and Joel Blumen was popular, and blah, 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 blah.
Damn.
Things that you remember, things that influence you along the way, that you don't think of consciously, but subconsciously you do.
Yeah. Particularly if you've been pained by something, it will come back on you. I want to go back on something. I know we've got a lot more to go, but when you were in law school, you had a student deferment for Vietnam during that period.
I was 4F.
Yeah.
My asthma.
Oh, okay. Because I was I got a low number, but I had a student deferment, and so I didn't have a bone spur or anything. There's another one. So you want a draft dodger?
No.
Yeah, that was it. So let's keep going.
Where do you want to go next?
Well, I want to go back to the kids. They're growing up. Tell me of where they are now, and
So, I always considered myself good in fundraising and PR. And the kids wound up doing both of those things. Now, Mike went to Brown. He was at Bronx High School of Science. And I became, on the first week there, we got a letter from the principal. He was caught smoking. It turned out there's another Mike Berkowitz at Bronx Science, and it clearly wasn't my Mike. Now, he did very well at Bronx Science. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa. I mean, he was quite good. In his senior year, he and some friends started a club inviting famous people to come back to school. The PA would pay for it, At this point, I was president of the Parents Association, and I did a fundraiser there. We did a phone-a-thon. They had always done a phone-a-thon where they raised, let's say, 50 grand a year, 70 grand a year. And I had a friend at Stuyvesant who did fundraising there. And she said they set a goal of $300 a head. That's what was expected. So the letter that we sent out was $200 a head. We doubled the income. So we had money. They invited the one person who came that I recall the best was Antonin Scalia, because Scalia represented all that I hated. And the dean, the principal, sent his assistant principals all around the school in case he drove up, blah, blah, blah. And what happened was a rent-a-wreck. He rented a rent-a-wreck. That's the name of the company.
Scalia did.
Yeah. And he came in a sport coat, slacks, and a shirt and tie with a full beard, with a beard. And he pulled up, but he didn't know if he could park there where he parked. So he sees this assistant principal, and he said, "Excuse me, man, I don't have time to talk to you." Well, God, but sir, we're waiting for a very important person. Well, who are you waiting for? A justice of the United States Supreme Court. And Scalia goes, "Well, I'm a justice of the United... We have him at gate one!" So Scalia goes in, and he meets me and the principal. I mean, we go to the office. We have a nice little reception. The nicest guy you'd ever want to meet.
He did have great personality.
He was great. And we had lunch. He then made his address. And someone asked a question about the living Constitution. And he took this is not a living document, it is blah, 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 blah. Okay. What did he do after class? After that? He went to classes for the rest of the day. And he goes to a history class where they're discussing civics. And the teacher says, blah, 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 blah. Yes, that's not the law. And the teacher said, it is the law. You are on the minority side of that. Now, it turns out Scalia was born in New York. He was born in Queens. He has an elderly aunt living in Queens. And so what he wanted the $200 for was to rent a car so he could go from the school to see his aunt, to stay over there, and then go back. It's fascinating. And now Oliver Stone comes next. Oliver Stone turns out to be a real first-class creep. As the kids are lined up in the auditorium to ask questions, he turns to the principal and he said, "Where'd you get all these Orientals?" Damn. And then he left right away, just...
Yeah, sometimes the ones you think should turn out a certain way.
Hugo Black, FDR appointing a member of the KKK to the Supreme Court of the United States, who turned out to be certainly one of the most liberal...
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah.
Felix Frankfurter, who was the great liberal, who turned out the other way.
Justice Douglas turned out to be a great liberal.
Now, just an aside, I belong to the National Arts Club, which is comprised, obviously, of artists of all denominations, etc., in all fields. And one of them, Norman Mailer's son, produced a show called Earl and Lyndon, and they did it at the Arts Club, and it begins with
Earl Warren?
with Lyndon calling in the Attorney General, and I can never remember his name.
Well, Ramsey Clark was.
No. Before that. I can't think of his name. And he said, I need you to go to the Supreme Court to talk to Earl Warren. I need to create a commission to go into the, what happened, etc. And the most trusted man in America is Earl Warren. And he goes to the court and he comes back and he said he refuses to do it because he said the case may ultimately come before the court. He said, fine, I'll deal with it. And he calls Earl up and he says, I need to see you in the White House. It's a matter of national security. He comes, he lays it out for him. He says, I can't do it. Blah, 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 blah. All right, I'll do it. And and Johnson said, allegedly, and here are the results. And at that point, Warren goes nuts. And he said, if you find that Russia had him killed, I must declare war on Russia. If you find that the CIA, working individually or with the FBI, did it, we will be so weak that our enemies can destroy us. If you find that Castro did it, I must declare war and blah, blah. And apparently, allegedly, he said, yes, fine. That's the end of it. And then there's a Q&A. And the Attorney General, who's sitting in the audience, comes up. And Norman Mailer's son said, is what my father wrote possible? He said, absolutely. We discuss all of those things together. Now, I'm at a button convention, a national button convention in Springfield, Illinois. And I have a friend named Bob Warren, who is his son.
Earl's son.
Earl's son. And I brought this up. I told him what happened, and he said, my father hated Johnson. He made him do all these things that he didn't want to do. He was constantly, never liked him. So it's interesting to see how things change, and but who knows?
Yeah. Kennedy would have never won without Johnson pulling the South, and those, he had to have him at the convention. He had, or he'd have lost the whole thing. I remember some of my family, they wouldn't vote for Kennedy because he was a Catholic, and they were scared the Pope was going to run America.
Yep.
And
that held fast until West Virginia primary.
That's right. And that's what killed, in 1928, the New York, who was Catholic.
Al Smith.
Al Smith, and that's what killed him too. So, we just elected our first statewide Jewish candidate in North Carolina, Josh Stein. So
Joshy.
He stayed at my cabin a few times when he was Attorney General.
And has no power because they're trying to take everything away.
It cut his balls off. Yeah.
But you
shouldn't have that on.
Well.
So, anything else coming forward?
Let's discuss Mike. So Mike gets a job after school, and he's doing some political writing, campaign brochures, etc. And it was the election was over, and he said that he wanted to go into fundraising. Now, Mike has worked with me at button shows, And one of the guys who I was friendly with was Francis Bonner.
Oh yeah, the Bonner Group.
No, Francis Bonner was with from Pennsylvania, was a big shot in Pennsylvania. He knew everybody in Pennsylvania. And he also was a diabetic. And he had a heart attack. And I went to visit him in the hospital. And he was all right. And he said, "What's Mike doing?" And he had met Mike through the Button shows. And I said, "Mike just finished working for so-and-so, and he's looking to get into fundraising." And from his sickbed, he calls up Mary Pat, who owns her own company. He's not affiliated with the Bonner Group,
Okay.
but it's his daughter. And he calls her and says, "I just hired someone. His name is Mike Berkowitz. He's going to start to work for you in January. You can call him and interview him, but he's hired." And they became fast friends. Fast friends. And she loved Mike. She really, I think, they had a great relationship. And Mike was her number two. And at a certain point, she was driving in a car. She calls Mike in the office, connects him to the phone call, says, "I might be going through a tunnel, so you talk to Susie." Go through a tunnel. "Hi, Mike. Hi, Susie." "Mike, did Dad's check come in?" Who's your dad? "Warren Buffett." So Mike did not relate well to that because he really wants to know all these things, right? So eventually Mike goes to the national convention and selling buttons for me, right? And I assigned them in 2000 to the Tennessee delegation. And again, I don't recall Gore's best friend who passed away. Who was in charge of special events, etc. Can you recall his name?
Oh, he was from actually Knoxville, I think. He was a big insurance guy.
I just can't think of his name.
I have trouble with memory and stuff.
So I get to the Tennessee delegation. I get to the hotel. And he's in the bar. And I call him on his phone. And he said, "Do not say hello to me when I come out of the bar, but follow me to the elevator." So I follow him to the elevator. We go upstairs. He empties out his suite, which has big suite. And on his desk, he has tickets for each and every little thing, every event. And I give him my Barbara Streisand button that I did. And he said, that was for the concert on Thursday night. And he said, "You know I'm chairing that event. When can I get 100 of them?" I said, "I'm going to call it in right now." I called Mitch. I said, "I need 100 of them shipped overnight." And he said, "You need tickets for this, that. So I want tickets. And I said, "My son is here." He said, "Your son is with Stephanie. They're running my event." He said, "Not only do they have tables in the morning, but they're doing registrations for lunch and dinner. They have all their buttons out there." It was great. I mean, it was really super. And then the next 4 years, Mike is in charge of special events. Mike's in charge of giving out tickets for every event. So, well, you have to go to see Mike, right? Okay. So, he who I cannot remember, who I feel guilty about, went to Mike and picked up his credentials, etc. And Mike said, "Are you going to see Dad, my father?" I said, yeah, I'm going over there now. He said, great, would you give him these tickets for, blah, blah. And we had a very funny story at that event. Francis called me up and he said, I have tickets for a big concert. It's $10,000 a head dinner concert. And on Thursday night after the convention. So Robin and I go. So the thing with Robin was, when I told her, she said, she has no clothes to wear. Because she's been, you're out, blah, 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 no clothes. So she goes and buys clothes. I think it's Ann Richards, whatever, whoever, Ann something or other. So she gets back, she comes in the car, and I said, so what do I owe you? $50. I said, how $50? She said, I went in, they showed me the racks, I picked out, it was reduced, and it was nothing. It started out at 500, and okay. And so when I brought it up to the cashier, it might have been less than 50, I just don't recall. So the cashier called the manager over, manager said, this is an error, because we would never reduce it this much. And Robin said, shit. And the woman said, you just got the buy of a lifetime. Why would you say that? If a car wasn't waiting for me outside, if you made one mistake, you made many mistakes, but I don't have the time to go through. She goes back out, she gets in the car, we go to the event. We don't exactly know where the dinner is. We're walking through this building. We get to the roof, open the door of the roof, and there's a guy there with a machine gun aimed at both of us. Oh, this is the wrong door. We go downstairs. We can't find it. We have to wait to get into where the concert is. You have to wait online. There's a magnometer there. So there are hundreds of people online. We get there, we're in the first row, sitting with Francis and an aide. Concert is great, there's no food, we're starved. So there's one booth selling hot dogs where the line is, and another booth selling lemonade, which is a short line. So I go to the lemonade, I take out a $50 bill, and there's a guy waiting on line near us. I'm for hot dogs. I say, excuse me, here's $50. Would you get me 4 hot dogs and keep the change? Right? So I didn't have to wait on line.
That's smart.
We had our food, we ate, concert starts, James Brown Taylor comes out. Oh, excuse me, he busted a string on his guitar allegedly. Had to go back, and now out walk John Kerry and his wife, and the place goes bonkers.
Wow.
Thousands of people there. Now the concert is over. How do we get home? He's in a wheelchair, and we're sitting, he said, the DNC is sending a bus for us. Great. They weren't sending it to where you're seated. They're sending it to the bus area. That's far away. They're all gone. So I go to, and Robin calls for a taxi, but you can't come in. So I go to a cop, the guy who's standing there, and I said, we have a problem. The gentleman sitting there in the first row is vice chairman of the convention, and he has no way to get back to the Four Seasons Hotel. And that would be a page 1 story, which would not look good for any of us. He commandeers a bus comes, takes the 4 of us back, bop! Interesting. interesting. All those little things that happen that you would never think would happen.
The conventions were great, weren't they? We've been to all of them since well, I was here in 76 for Carter.
I was here in 76.
Yeah. And every one since then, I guess.
Do you know how I got into the convention in 76? I didn't have a thing. Jane Kalmus, whose picture she was a PR woman, was delivering newspapers. So she said, "You carry all the papers in and walk behind me." So I was carrying the papers in, so they knew I had a credential, otherwise I wouldn't be there. So that's how I got in.
Damn.
This will be for another story, but just interestingly, when I became good friends with Jimmy Breslin and Ronnie Eldridge, I saw Jimmy in 2008 on the floor, and we had this nice long talk. I want to meet her. I want to meet her. Cyndi Lauper. Really? So I walked over to Cyndi Lauper, and I said, "I have someone who wants to meet you." Jimmy Breslin. Oh, Jim, the two of them. Yeah. Just all interesting stories.
So Breslin was a friend. Breslin was a friend of yours.
So Ronnie Eldridge came up to my office one day, early when the primary was going to be between Obama and Hillary. She called me on the phone. I hadn't talked to her in years. Said, "Are you still making buttons?" I said, "Yes." So she and a friend came up, and we need to get some Obama buttons. So what they did was, they took all the buttons I had made, and they sold them on street corners. They put out 10 tables every weekend, and she would come back and give me bags full of cash.
Yeah.
And Judy went nuts. "I can't count on," it was nickels, quarters, or whatever. I said, "You give it to the bank, they'll count it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it." So she would order a little 1¼ inch button that just said Obama. It was white on blue.
Yeah.
And she ultimately bought a ton of buttons. And I would deliver this stuff to her house. She lived at 68th and Broadway at the time. And the first Friday night that I went up there, I said, "How's Jimmy?" "Oh, fine. Say hello. He's in bed." I'm not going. He entertains in bed. He's eating his dinner in bed. There are other people there. You can go in. So I go in, and he's eating Chinese food, watching TV, and have friends there. Okay. So sometime later, Judy and I went to visit our niece in Portland, Oregon, and we went to Powell's. Do you know Powell's? It's the biggest bookstore in the country. They have 4 stories, and then 2 blocks away, they have 2 more stories on just their tech books. You can get any book you want within 3 minutes. It's really incredible. So I bought The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. So I go to check out, and the woman says, "It's $17. And I said, "Why is it so much?" First of all, it's autographed, and second, the author is dead. And I said, "Did Jimmy die this morning? Because we had dinner with him last night." "Don't ever tell him I said he was dead." I said that to Ronnie, and she said, "Don't ever tell him that story because he'll never get out of bed." And then he wrote a really lovely page, to me.
Did he?
It was great. A great guy. Really was. But you meet, it's incredible all the people you meet. In 2004, in Boston, Shelley Silver, who was the the Speaker of the House of the Assembly, had a party, the first on a Friday night. Had a party. New York, other people. Hillary was there. My attorney, Jerry Goldfeder, who is a prominent New York attorney, very politically connected, was there. And someone showed me, and I set up. Nobody said anything. Set up. And I'm selling. And suddenly somebody shows me a copy of the New York Post for the day. I'm on the front cover of the Post. There are 4 pictures on the front cover. Perry Crisatelli, a restaurateur from Little Italy, talking to Mike Bloomberg. Behind Mike is Mort Berkowitz. Behind Perry is Arnie Chris, our attorney. As my partner said later, thank God you were looking at Arnie, so nobody saw your Morton Ray cap. It could have been 3 Jews, and he had been outed that day, Perry, as a made man. So what happened the next day, Giuliani had said that Danico was his favorite restaurant in Little Italy. That was gone from the website. Danico was no longer the caterer at Gracie Mansion or City Hall.
Damn.
Yeah, gone. Boom. And Hillary came over, and I gave her the button, a couple of buttons, and Jerry proclaimed, and it was in print, Mort used to be the button baron of the Big Apple, but now he's the button baron of America.
So, let me jump back to where
Let's go back to Stacy.
That's where I want to go.
Actually, we'll go back to Mike. So Mike moves to California, and he sets up a consulting company, and with 2 brothers, very close friends, and they now have 100 employees.
What kind of consulting company?
You name it. He runs a thing called the Democracy Project. Maybe it's not called that, but he's friends with James Dean and all these other people that we never used to write about. They hold conferences all over, and he does a lot of work. He sits on a number of boards, a number of Pritzker boards.
Yeah, Chicago.
No, not in Chicago. Pritzker, there are many Pritzkers. Several of them live in Berkeley.
Okay.
And Mike sits on their boards. He's chief advisor on one, Rachel Pritzker. Terrific.
That's great, Mort.
Stacy went to American University. First, she went to LaGuardia High School. LaGuardia High School for the Performing Arts. I never became president of the PA, but I did their fundraising, and they used to make $20,000 a year selling cookies at all their performances. I brought it up to $80,000 by doing a phone-a-thon. I mean, big difference, big difference. Really, some terrific stuff there.
Good.
And yeah, very, very nice.
So where is she now?
She went to American University, and she got a job, and then she got a job the second year with, do you remember the name of the attorney who represented Clinton on the impeachment committee? No, neither do I. But he had a firm of around 7 or 8 lawyers, and he started to get into PR. Now, at that time, Boeing and Airbus were in a big fight. So Boeing hired a Democratic PR firm, a Republican PR firm, and a regular PR firm. And the 3 representatives would meet, and they selected my 21-year-old daughter, Stacy, to represent Boeing.
Wow.
Now, whatever she was earning, she's earning peanuts. After a year, she said, she calls home to her mother, I want to come home. I want to be with people my own age. You know, everyone is, they're all old. So she asked me if I would set up interviews for her. My friend Tom Allen was friends with Howard Rubinstein. Now, I don't know if you know the name, but Howard, if you had a problem, you called Howard. Howard was the guru.
The fixer.
Howard represented the Mets, the Yankees, the Post, the Times, the News. Howard was it. So Howard's people agreed to interview her. But there were no jobs. We knew that at the beginning. Comes home the first day. How was it? It was 4 hours and they want me back tomorrow.
4-hour interview.
Comes home the next day, she's crying. How am I ever going to learn how to interview if people keep hiring me? She does that for X number of years, earning nice money. At the end of, say, 7 or 8 years, whatever, a firm that she represented for Howard, she represented law firms, and they offered her a job to double her salary and double her bonus. So she was very happy. And she did that for probably 8 years or so. And she just got another position where they've been, the Gibson and Dunn, where they recruited her. And they made her an offer that she did very, very, very well.
Good, Mort.
Very well. And so she has 2 lovely kids, a little boy and a little girl, Aiden and Remy.
One has red hair.
No, that's Levi and Ari in California.
Oh, okay.
And nobody knows where Levi's hair came from, but yeah. And Ari has taken up the violin and the guitar, and he now does concert. He's in a band.
How old are these kids, Mort, now?
11 and 8.
Okay.
9 and 7.
So you have 4 grandkids.
Yep. So when Mike mentioned the band, I recalled living on 84th Street, as we do now, friends with a young and still Amira. Sorry. They're getting ready for Ben's bar mitzvah. And Jerry is going nuts. Ben has a band, and they're always rehearsing in the apartment. They held it at Stephen Wise Synagogue, a Reform synagogue, catered by the sisterhood. There's a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And the sisterhood served tuna on rye and egg salad on white. As Anne said, who am I trying to impress? The sisterhood needs some money more than a caterer does.
Yeah.
Judy did not want to go because she felt there'd be all these celebrities there. Trust me, we were the biggest celebrities there. It was Aunt this and Uncle that. And Jerry one day is driving down the block near Christmas time, And he stops the car, he sees me on a stoop. And he says, "We have a gift for you." So he opens up the trunk, and there are hundreds. There are tons of gifts there, all wrapped, no names on anything. And he pulls something out, and he gives it to me. You know, I'm happy, man, blah, 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 blah. And I said, it's really very nice and generous of them. They didn't have to do that. And he didn't have anything specifically for me, but, you know. And when we opened it upstairs, it was to Mort and Judy. He knew everything in his trunk, who was which, what was what.
Even though it didn't have a name on it. Wow.
No. At our street fair, our third or fourth street fair, one of my officers of the Block Association came over to me and said, "You know, they used to paint apartments white. They would paint over all the wood, and white was in for a period of time. Well, her husband, Haig stripped everything down. They opened up a closet they never knew. Theda Bara, who was the vamp of the silent screen, lived there. And all her clothes were there. It was terrific. And so it's Thursday night when Elise came over to me, and playing volleyball with me is a guy named Sergio Aragonis, one of the great-looking men of all time. Hair, hairy chest, great mustache. You ever read Mad?
My cousin Dee Dee. Let me turn this sound off.
You ever read Mad magazine?
Yes.
All the marginals around, done by Sergio Aragonis.
Oh.
And I told Sergio that Theda Bara lived there. And I'm going to have a block party. Theda Bara meets the Raven. Within 20 minutes, the artwork was done. There is a raven in tails, Theda Bara in a beautiful gown, arm in arm, and it was magnificent.
That fast.
That fast and that good, and you just don't know who's playing. You don't know, because you never take the time. You see an old person, you don't ask them what they did in life before that. One day, at a table that I had for a block fair, I'm collecting donations that we can auction and sell. And there's a little kid, about 8 or 9, who's sitting with me, and his father comes home in torn dungarees and a dungaree shirt. And he said, "Daddy, you have to give Mort some books for the block fair." He said, "Sure, Mort, what kind of books would you like?" And I'm not thinking anything spectacular. I said, "Cookbooks." The bookmaster's truck pulled up that morning, and 1,000 brand new cookbooks were given to me. I could have anything in the world. I did not need 1,000 cookbooks. It's like I want slice salami. It never dawned on me to ask him. I went around, I interviewed people periodically, asking what they did, etc. I did not a who's who on the block, but for anyone who wanted their phone number, their address, any information, we did a brochure. And this elderly man lived in Nazi Germany before Hitler and during Hitler. I mean, fascinating. But when you looked at him, he was just an old man.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that John Prine song? Hello in there.
I am very neglectful. I lose things. I lost my wallet. I left it in a cab. A woman found it. She called me up and said, "I have your wallet." My wallet's gone. She says, yes, I have it. She lives on 79th Street. Great. I went over there, met in the lobby, and I said, I'd like to do something or whatever. She said, we don't sell anything. My husband teaches piano. I said, oh, okay. But he could sell that at the street fair, do less. He's a teacher. So it turns out, small world, his two children and my two children were best friends. He, one day, he was born, say, in Germany. He told me this story, which you will find it turns out his mother smuggled him out of Germany when he was a little baby. They crossed the Austrian border where they met a Catholic family, and the woman raised him as a girl, because if he was a boy, he would have been killed. Now, he decided one day, as an adult, let me preface this, he wants to show his kids where he grew up, etc. They go back, it wasn't Austria, it was Czechoslovakia. They go back to what he believed was where he was raised. And they see an elderly woman walking nearby. And the son, Gabe, none of them are religious. Gabe goes over to the woman and explains her son, his father was raised, blah, blah, and goes over, and the woman touches she raised him.
Oh my God.
The son is now an Orthodox rabbi. He moved to Israel. And I called one of Robin's friends, Hillary Hellstein, who works for the Shoah Foundation. She did. And I called to tell her the story, and she said, oh, I know, Les. We interviewed him 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I was just amazed. Just how could...
Yeah.
Coincidence. I lose my wallet again on a cab. Woman finds it, calls me, and said, I have your wallet, meets me in my lobby. And thank you. I was taking the kids home from synagogue, from studies, and they had other friends in the cab, and by the time everybody got out, I was disheveled. So, turns out she works for ABC News. Graphics. I said, I'm partners with your boss, Ben Blank, and I'm going to call him in the morning to... I'm going to call him in the morning to thank him. So, blah, blah. So she gets credit for that. That was good. Okay.
You have a list you want to go over.
My list is broken down into several categories: politicians, actors, artists, dancers, singers, athletes. It's for another time.
Okay.
For another time. I think we did enough today, don't you think?
Yeah. We do need to come back and do a kind of a summation, I think.
What type of summation?
Just your life, how you look back at your life. Would you change anything? you do anything differently? Any regrets?
No. I think that I've lived, for me, an extraordinary life. Growing up in Brooklyn, going to the Feast of San Gennaro, being overwhelmed by this, block after block after block, going to the Chinese New Year and being scared stiff from all the firecrackers going off. It's amazing to me that I produced both of those events. I mean, but that's really another story. But I've done events, I've done things that I would never have thought possible. I produced all the vendors for the Statue of Liberty celebration. We had, the police had set up a special area for the review of the tall ships. That I was sitting there with my wife, with 100 other people, as a sergeant or lieutenant came over to me and said, we're holding all the people in the park, over 100,000 people, waiting for you to get out of here. You know, and then we just opened the gates and bop. It's extraordinary to me. I mean, and to see the first tall ship coming around, being by myself to see this, it was extraordinary. Yeah. And the Statue of Liberty celebration. I mean, doing all these things with so many people, prominent people, regular people, whatever, and just thinking of myself as this scared kid from Brooklyn. I'll give you one other story. At the age of 18 or 19, a group of 4 of us went to Manhattan in a car. I had never really thought of Manhattan. I went to Roseland. Now, you never heard of Roseland. But Roseland was the biggest dance club around. 700 people could fit on a dance floor. It was humongous. It was around 52nd Street and Broadway, 7th Avenue. And I was gutsy. I walked over to this woman and asked her to dance. She looked at me and said, "I never dance with a baby." And I said, "Madam, had I known you were pregnant, I never would have asked you." And some woman looked over at her and said, "Pregnant? Did you come here?" But if you thought I was going to ask anyone else to dance, you're nuts. Not that night.
Yeah.
I was 17. I went to Nathan's. We used to go to Nathan's in Coney Island. And I asked for a beer. And the guy said, "Let me see your draft card." I wasn't 18. I didn't have a draft card. I waited all year. The one thing I had in my mind, I was going to show him. When I hit 18, I took the train to Coney Island. I got off. I went to Nathan's. And I said, "I want a beer." And he said, "Here's a beer." "I don't want your lousy beer. I want you to see my draft card." Going to the beach in Brooklyn was seeing you had 1 inch of space because there was someone right next to you on all 4 sides. You got sand everywhere. Someone got up, they kicked sand in your face. Not intentionally, but never knew any of that. That's what it was. My junior year, my second year at Fordham Law School, my friend Vic Ludmira and 2 other guys said, "We're going to go to Nantucket for the weekend. Do you want to go?" I never heard of Nantucket. To me, it was a Catholic retreat. They were all Catholics. It was a Catholic retreat. We go to Nantucket, and I went to the jetties. Mm-hmm. There were miles. All you saw was sand.
Mm-hmm. And nobody on them.
No. And we'll do a whole segment on Nantucket because it was inspirational to me.
Yeah. I was there for a week in February, friend rents a place, and we go up and we walk. We don't see anybody. You know, everything's closed downtown anyway in that month. So it is different.
So Jerry and Ann, still Ramira, used to do Est in Nantucket. And they would go there. And one year they decided they're going to have a house built on Children's Beach. And so they paid X amount of dollars. And when it was built the next year, it was already triple the value that she was offered. We used to go for dinner when I was there with Judy, before Judy. And one year, I called Jerry. Ann was not there. And we agreed we're going to the lobster trap.
Yep.
Jerry and Amy came. And Judy and I were there before they got there. And halfway through dinner, as Jerry normally would do, he gets up to go to the bathroom. In other words, he goes to pay the check.
Yeah.
And he comes back to the table. How could you do that? You know I always pay the bill. And I said, if you had gotten here on time, you would have paid it this year too.
Mort, thanks for today.
It's fun, and it brings back so many stories.
Ones that you hadn't thought about. And,
No.
And now that we'll do another session, there'll be a lot come to mind that you'll want to share on that tape.